High in the Red Mountains, Lyanna Stark waited in the fortress of Prince's Pass as the sun dipped low over the horizon. A hush lay upon the winding corridors, and only the torch fires crackled in greeting as her handmaiden guided her from one hushed chamber to another. She felt a quiet tension lingering in the air, the taste of it thick as dust, as if the sandstone walls themselves anticipated the moment that was to come. Her heart fluttered beneath her bodice, the pulse of it both an anchor and a warning. All around her lay the fearful hush of possibility, too fragile to name, too ferocious to dismiss. She'd traveled under secrecy, fleeing the eyes of her brother and the wrathful armies that drew swords for her sake. She once thought of home, Winterfell's eternal snows, and felt a pang of guilt for leaving without explanation. She remembered the sharpened gazes of her brothers, Brandon's voice, always so loud and fearless, ringing across the training yard, and Ned's measured kindness, his hush for words that needed no saying. Memories of them made her stomach twist with longing. Now the reality of her situation weighed heavier than the cloak on her shoulders. The walls within were thick, but in the half-empty halls, her footsteps echoed, imprinting themselves on the stone. Servants averted their eyes, not quite comfortable with the presence of a high-born lady who was neither captive nor free, neither Targaryen nor rebel, but something in between, someone touched by both House Stark and House Targaryen. And it was that duality, that complicated swirl of allegiances, that threatened to tumble all of Westeros into chaos. They all whispered about her in cautious corners. Rhaegar's mistress, some called her. Others used harsher words. Traitor to the north. But now, in the quiet of an evening that felt too large for the mortal world, she braced herself for a new identity that would soon break free. A single candle lit the chamber she entered, revealing a narrow bed, a polished mirror of Dornish glass, and a high-backed wooden chair. The windows were shuttered, blocking out the cold wind that soared across the mountains. The hush felt like an omen of the secrets she had carried too long, pressing forward in her mind, like a tide refusing to recede. She wanted to speak, to announce the truth that swirled in her heart, yet fear lurked at the edges of her mind. The vow she had made to Rhaegar, that their union would herald a new dawn for the realm, trembled as she thought of the precarious balance that would soon topple. She wondered if she had the strength to be the first stone cast in this crumbling tower. But for her child, she would do it. She sat, letting her handmaiden fuss about her braided hair. This was hardly the environment she'd once dreamed for herself. The promised betrothal to Robert Baratheon seeming distant now, a memory from another life. She pictured Robert's broad grin, his booming laugh, his ferocious pride. She recalled how he declared he would love only her, that she was beauty made flesh, a jest that once made her giggle behind her hands. But that brightness had become a scalding light, one that overshadowed the complexities she now felt. The child in her arms, the one that was not yet born but so close that she felt him turning inside her. He was a new chord in the song of her destiny, one that throbbed in her belly, fluttered and kicked, anchoring her more than any vow or ring. And soon, he would be more than just a secret. Time ebbed onward. The hush among the mountains grew colder. The Raven's Nest, the section of the fortress she occupied, was mostly deserted, but she could sense the watchers beyond the walls, loyal to Rhaegar, loyal to the dream of a Targaryen restoration. They waited for news of the baby, for signs that the realm might yet have a future. For Rhaegar had pinned his hopes on a prophecy, a song, a dream. She closed her eyes to glean strength from these silent watchers. She carried, after all, more than just a child. She carried the possibility of a kingdom reborn. Yet the weight of that knowledge made each breath a trial. When finally she returned to her bedchamber, she found herself alone. Except for the tall mirror that flickered with the reflection of candlelight, the shawl around her shoulders drifted to the ground as she approached the mirror, gazing upon herself with newly awakened eyes. Her face looked pale, but her gray Stark eyes glowed with some quiet fury, some defiance of all that had tried to shape her fate. She wondered if the child would have her eyes or his father's. That question lingered like a physical ache in her. She slid her hand across her belly, feeling the shift of life inside, and gently whispered, "You are more than just my son. You are your father's, too." Outside, a gust of wind rattled the shutters. In the distant gloom, she heard the sound of approaching footfalls. Her heart clenched. She had hoped for Rhaegar's return, but it had been weeks since news had arrived from the battlefront. The rebellion roared across the realm, Robert's hammer forging a path of destruction, Ned's quiet sense of duty urging him to find her. Even the Targaryens themselves warred internally, with Mad King Aerys unleashing cruelty upon the realm. She felt, in these late hours, on the precipice of a changing world, uncertain which side of the realm would claim her child's destiny. A knock on her door startled her. It was the midwife, her face etched with the lines of many births, stepping carefully into the gloom. "My lady," she said, "is there anything you need?" Lyanna exhaled. She had been so lost in her own swirling thoughts that the mundane question felt almost ridiculous. She forced a smile, running her palm over the soft swell of her belly. "Thank you," Lyanna replied. "I need only sleep." Though she asked for no further assistance, the midwife lingered. There was an unspoken pity in the woman's gaze that made Lyanna's skin prickle. "You'll be needing rest," she said again, more gently. "Might happen sooner than you think, the babe coming." "Yes," Lyanna said softly, hardly trusting her voice. "Sooner than we think." Yet in her private heart, she knew there would be no calm in the days to come. No gentle hush of routine, no quietly whispered lullabies. She closed her eyes and imagined them anyway. By the time dawn's first light glimmered through the shutters, the fortress was strangely awake. Word had arrived at last that Prince Rhaegar was returning. Her heart leaped as that rumor gathered in the corridors like a swirl of wind. She rose from bed, ignoring the hunger in her belly, and paced across the mosaic floors, holding herself upright. Was it true? Could he have found victory against the rebel forces that raged at his family's heels? Or was it a final flight, a desperate retreat? She felt her breath hitch at the second possibility. She did not want to imagine the sorrow that would line his face if he returned in defeat. She clung to the fleeting hope that the father of her child was not beaten, not broken, that the future they had risked all for might still be salvaged. Yet the hours moved sluggishly, and Rhaegar did not appear. A measure of anxiety stole across her chest. She heard the bustle among the fortress staff, the increased presence of Targaryen bannermen in the courtyard. She peered from a narrow window high above, glimpsing men in silvered armor bearing dragon-crested shields. They looked weary and dust-covered, as though they had traveled all night without pause. She heard disjointed words drifting upwards. Trident, Robert's victory, King's Landing threatened, the prince's next move. The swirl of rumors overwhelmed her mind, each snippet of gossip twisting her anxieties tighter. She inhaled slowly. This was not how she had pictured her life. She had thought to be a wraith, hidden from the world until the child was born. But the world had come knocking before she was ready. Perhaps it had always been knocking, from the moment she first saw Rhaegar in the great tourney at Harrenhal, the crown of blue roses in his hand. She recalled that smell, fresh winter roses, a symbol that had once belonged to her alone. He had crowned her the queen of love and beauty, and the hush that fell upon the crowd was thunderous in its silence. She remembered looking upon him, seeing the sadness in his violet eyes, as if he were searching for something deeper, something that transcended a simple crowning of flowers. She had foolishly believed she could be that answer. Midday came with a soft scurry of footsteps outside her door. When it opened, she saw Sir Oswell Went, a man of the Kingsguard she had grown used to these last few months. He bowed with solemn grace. "My lady, Prince Rhaegar has returned. He wishes to speak with you." "Where is he?" Lyanna's voice carried a hint of breathlessness. "In the great hall, my lady." She bit back her impatient questions and nodded. Sir Oswell escorted her down the winding corridors, past soldiers in battered armor, past anxious courtiers who paused to stare at the stark girl swollen with child. In their expressions, she saw confusion, pity, and sometimes scorn. But she forced her gaze ahead, focusing only on her steps, on the path that led her to Rhaegar. The fortress's great hall was a long chamber with high vaulted ceilings, stone pillars carved with Dornish flair, and stained glass windows depicting scenes of Rhoynish lordly. The light through the tinted glass fell in patches of color, painting the flagstones with swirling patterns of red and gold. There, Near the dais stood Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. His once shining armor was tarnished, the dent in his breastplate a visible reminder of a brutal clash. His long silver-gold hair hung loose about his shoulders, and his pale face was drawn with exhaustion. And yet, when he saw Lyanna approach, a spark lit his violet eyes. He offered his hand, and she took it gently, aware of how many gazes were upon them. Her heart pounded at the closeness of him, at the subtle smell of sweat and dust, and the faint aroma of leather from his gauntlets. This was the man who had risked the fury of the realm for her, and to whom she had given her heart. He led her away from the watchful cluster of knights and retainers toward a smaller alcove at the side of the hall. "My love," he murmured. "Are you well?" "I am," she managed, though her voice trembled with relief and fear. "And you?" "They say the battles have gone poorly." His lips pressed into a thin line, and she saw the haunted flicker in his gaze. "Robert Baratheon is no mere warrior. He is unstoppable on the field. The rumors of his might weren't exaggerations. We clashed at the Trident. I lost good men. If not for a retreat called at the right moment, I might not be standing here." He exhaled, the weight of it driving a hush between them. "It's worse than I anticipated. Father grows more unstable by the day. Word from King's Landing says he's begun to trust only his pyromancers, whispering about wildfire. The realm is on the brink of ruin." Lyanna closed her eyes. She could see in Rhaegar's posture that the burden of it all weighed him down like a chain around his neck. But his gaze soon dropped to her belly, and despite everything, a faint smile curved on his lips. "How is our child?" She felt tears welling. The yearning in his voice told her that, in spite of the chaos, in spite of war, this small life was a bright hope. "He's ready," she said, though it took her a moment to gather her voice. "Hell comes soon." Rhaegar drew a breath that seemed to steady him. "I'll keep you safe, both of you," he promised quietly, his warm hand pressing over hers. "There must be a chance for peace, for a new beginning." Her eyes glistened. She believed him, or desperately wanted to. Yet 1,000 obstacles lay in wait. Robert's rage, her brother Ned's heartbreak, the entire realm caught in the crossfire of loyalties. A swirl of conflicting emotions bubbled inside her, but her mind returned to a single unwavering resolve. If Westeros was to be engulfed in flames, she would not let her child burn in secrecy. Better to stand in the open, to be known, to be real. Her lips parted, and she whispered, "We can't hide him, Rhaegar. Not forever. Not if we want him to inherit a realm worth living in." He nodded gravely. "I know," he said. "But we must be careful. My father's paranoia grows every hour. I can no longer trust many within the royal circle. Yet, we cannot let Robert claim him. Nor can we let your kin see him as a threat. He is of both Stark and Targaryen blood." "Namasin." "I won't be silent any longer," Lyanna said, her voice surprisingly firm. A blossoming confidence took root inside her. "When the time comes, I'll name him openly for who he is. He deserves no less." Rhaegar squeezed her hand, a silent pact formed between them. And as they returned to the center of the hall, their gazes followed by watchful onlookers, Lyanna thought she saw the faint outline of the path forward. It would be treacherous and lined with heartbreak, but it was a path nonetheless. She felt her heart pulse with something akin to hope, even as the heavy gloom of the war pressed in around them. That night, a feast of sorts was prepared in the Great Hall. It was a meager affair by royal standards, just roasted pheasant, and some Dornish wines. The fortress stores running low after housing so many soldiers. Lyanna found herself seated at a table near Rhaegar, protected by the presence of Kingsguard. Fragments of conversation floated to her ears. Lords and knights discussed upcoming maneuvers, the uncertain loyalty of the Lannisters, and rumors that the Tyrells might still support the crown. Another rumor insisted that Ned Stark had formed an alliance with the Riverlands and the Vale, leaving King's Landing more vulnerable than ever. She dined quietly, occasionally sipping water to soothe her throat, aware of Rhaegar's stolen glances in her direction. Sometimes she caught the disapproval on the faces of certain lords who saw her presence as an affront. Yet she squared her shoulders, reminding herself that her child had a place here, no matter who might deny it. For too long, she had survived in quiet secrecy, hidden away like a rumor. Soon, she would step into the light. Mid-feast, she felt the unmistakable pang within her womb. For a moment, her fork clattered. It wasn't the first time she'd felt the baby shift, but something about this motion felt different, more insistent, more like a call to attention. She inhaled sharply, and Rhaegar's gaze snapped to her. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice hushed. She nodded, but the flicker of worry in his eyes lingered. "I'm fine. He's just reminding me he's here," she replied, forcing a smile. He returned to his conversation, though now he seemed unable to focus, occasionally stealing quick glances her way, as if expecting her to cry out that the time was upon them. She steadied herself, determined not to attract further attention. She couldn't quite dismiss a swell of excitement rising in her. Each new pang reminded her how close she was to the future that had been promised. When the meal ended, Rhaegar escorted her back to her chambers, passing rows of knights who dipped their heads in deference to the prince. Once alone in the corridor, he paused to press a gentle kiss to her temple. "I wish things were different," he said quietly, "that you could be at Summerhall or Dragonstone, with proper comforts, not here in a fortress overshadowed by war." She cupped his cheek. "We don't choose the times we're born into. We can only do our best with what we have. And you've done all you can, Rhaegar." He closed his eyes, drawing solace from her touch. "I've not done enough," he murmured, but then he shook off the darkening mood. "Let us rest. Tomorrow, we'll gather what men we can and find a way to keep you safe until the birth. After, we'll make the truth known. One step at a time, one step at a time." The days that followed were both too swift and too monotonous. Rhaegar spent his hours in war councils, sending ravens to loyalists, planning routes with Dornish allies. The fortress, once sleepy, bustled with the arriving trickle of survivors from the lost battles. Whispers of Robert Baratheon's next move rattled the staff. Sometimes, Lyanna glimpsed the fear in the eyes of the younger soldiers. It was said Robert had set his sights on King's Landing itself, that he marched with a host that could not be stopped. Lyanna's heart tightened at the thought of bloodshed in the capital. Servants, children, innocents caught in the crossfire of a mad king's final stand, and a rebel's wrath. She prayed, in quiet moments, for some measure of mercy, to find the realm before it was too late. Her own burdens weighed heavier each dawn. She tired more easily, her feet swollen, her back aching. The midwife visited daily, proclaiming that the child might come any moment. Each night, she tried to keep her eyes open as Rhaegar returned late from his plans. Exhausted and grim, he'd lie beside her for a short while, stroking her hair, whispering half-formed assurances before drifting into a restless sleep. She listened to his breathing, wondered about the shape of their future, and felt a pang of guilt that her own comfort might be overshadowing his. But as dawn returned, he rose again to his duties, leaving her to wait day after day. Finally, it happened. It was a stormy afternoon, the sky dark with roiling clouds that spat lightning across the horizon. The wind howled through the fortress, a wild lament that set the torches dancing. Lyanna had been in her chamber, resting in a chair by the shuttered window, when a sharp, rhythmic pain clenched her belly, forcing a gasp from her lips. She gripped the arm of the chair until her knuckles went white. The midwife rushed in at her cry, wide-eyed but methodical, setting about to prepare a suitable space. The corridor was soon abuzz with activity. Guards rushed to find the prince. Servants hurried with steaming water and clean linens, and hushed exclamations floated through the halls. Rhaegar arrived minutes later, face pale and drawn tight with worry. Kneeling beside Lyanna, he helped her to a bed hastily arranged with pillows. The pains came again, more powerful, stealing her breath. She clutched Rhaegar's hand, nails digging into his palm, yet he only whispered soft words of encouragement. Sweat beaded on Lyanna's forehead, as the hours stretched in a haze of agony. She vaguely heard the midwife's measured instructions, felt the presence of another helper pressing cool cloths against her brow. The corridor outside hummed with tension, as if the entire fortress held its breath. Her world collapsed into a dance of pain and perseverance. She cried out, drowning in wave after wave of contraction, certain she would break. Rhaegar's voice was the only constant, urging her to push, urging her to hold on. The candle flames flickered in the wind that seeped through the shutters. Rain battered the roof, sending echoes through the halls. Time lost meaning. The candle burnt down to a stub. Then, after an eternity of anguish, a shrill cry cut through the chamber. Trembling, Lyanna collapsed back against the pillows, breath ragged, tears streaming down her cheeks. The midwife wrapped the tiny squalling babe in a soft cloth and placed him gently in Lyanna's outstretched arms. Her heart swelled. She stared down at the child, at the tuft of dark hair, at the small fists balled with the fury of new life. Her tears fell in relief and love. Rhaegar's hand rested on her shoulder, and she glanced up to see that he too was crying, silent tears sliding down his cheeks. "He's perfect," Lyanna whispered, kissing the baby's forehead. His newborn cries echoed with a life all his own, a fragile yet commanding presence in the world. Rhaegar bent to place a tender kiss upon the child's brow. Exhaustion tugged at Lyanna, but she fought to stay alert, to seize the beauty of this moment. The midwife, half smiling, took up a fresh cloth to clean away some of the birth's aftermath. As the infant's cries slowly subsided, Rhaegar draped a gentle arm around them both. "A son," he murmured. "We have a son." Lyanna nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. She swallowed the lump in her throat, recalling the vow she had made to herself. She would not hide him away, would not let him be a footnote to the realm's chaos. She smoothed a trembling hand over his dark hair, feeling his warmth. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We have a son? Aegon Rhaegar?" Rhaegar considered the name, the echo of prophecy in his violet gaze. Yet something within Lyanna whispered of her own house, her own legacy. She tried out words on her tongue, uncertain, feeling a swirl of loyalty to both father and mother, to Stark and Targaryen. But Rhaegar nodded, as if hearing that same internal whisper. "He should carry both of us," he said softly. "A name that all will know." He pressed his palm gently against his son's tiny chest. "We have a tradition in my family, but the North deserves recognition too." Lyanna's gaze flicked to the midwife, to the watchers in the room, and then to the half-ajar door. A hush had fallen, but she knew a crowd lingered just outside. She pushed back the covers, determined to stand even in her exhaustion. Rhaegar tried to protest, but she shook her head firmly. With careful assistance she rose, the baby in her arms, and crossed the chamber in slow, wobbling steps. The door swung wider, revealing knights, servants, and lords assembled in nervous curiosity. She saw Sir Oswell went, and beside him, a cluster of onlookers in Targaryen livery. All turned at once, startled to see the prince's lady up and about, child clutched to her chest. Her voice wavered, but she spoke clearly. "This is my son," she announced to those gathered. "The son of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, and Lyanna Stark of Winterfell." A ripple of shock coursed through the crowd. Murmurs broke out, confusion and awe, twisting the watchers' expressions. Rhaegar stepped to Lyanna's side, supporting her as she held the newborn high for all to see. Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the corridor for a single blinding instant, as if the gods themselves bore witness to her proclamation. Lyanna's eyes flickered with fierce determination, her earlier shyness gone. "He is Jon," she said, voice echoing in the hush. She locked gazes with the wide-eyed knights and lords, willing them to accept this truth. Jon Targaryen, son of ice and fire. She felt the child's weight in her arms, the living proof of everything she had risked, everything she had chosen. Rhaegar bowed his head, a solemn acceptance of the boy's name. The watchers looked from mother to father, and in their eyes Lyanna saw wonder, maybe even fear, as if they sensed the swirling future that now rested in that small, wailing bundle. Word traveled swiftly. Within the next few hours, many across the fortress whispered the name, Jon Targaryen, uncertain how to make sense of the child's lineage. Rhaegar's men began to refer to him as the realm's newest prince. Others, especially those with loyalties to the north, seemed torn by the knowledge that Lyanna Stark, beloved daughter of Winterfell, had named a Targaryen son. The lines between Stark and Targaryen were no longer neat. Lyanna felt a complex mix of triumph and sorrow. She had claimed her child openly, but at what cost? In the days that followed, ravens were dispatched, messages of the birth flitting through the war-torn lands. Rhaegar penned letters to influential lords, urging them to recognize Jon Targaryen as a symbol of unity, an heir born of two ancient houses. Some messages were met with scorn, others with guarded curiosity. Over and over, Lyanna read the words Rhaegar wrote, feeling the resonant power of a child who embodied the North and the dragon. She wondered how her brother Ned would react. Her heart clenched at the thought of him reading that letter, at the swirl of betrayal and relief and heartbreak that might cross his loyal face. She spent her days and nights tending to Jon in a small suite of chambers that overlooked a courtyard where pomegranate trees grew. Their fruit was not yet ripe, but she marveled at their petals of blood-red flowers. Sometimes she would stand at the window, rocking Jon gently, humming soft lullabies she'd learned in the North. The hush of her voice and the faint coo of her babe became the entire world in those moments. Beyond those walls, the realm burned. Each new raven brought word of savage battles. The Mad King's fury had become a living flame. Robert Baratheon pressed closer to the capital. Her father, Lord Rickard Stark, was dead, along with Brandon. Lyanna's heart ached at these reminders, her mind drawn to the heartbreak that had pushed Ned to join the rebels. She prayed that one day she could face her brother and ask forgiveness, explain the love she had found, the reasons she had turned away from the path that had been set for her. But in the uncertain hours, she clung to her child, the life that anchored her present and future. One afternoon, she dozed in a sunbeam beside the cradle, lulled by Jon's soft breathing. Rhaegar found her there, easing down beside her, nestling himself so that his cheek rested against hers. She stirred, eyes fluttering open, and managed a faint smile. He seemed so tired, so burdened by the demands of a realm at war. "There's been a response from the North," he said quietly. "Your brother, he knows you're alive, that you've had a child. He's demanded proof you are unharmed." Lyanna's heart surged. Ned's fear for her well-being was so predictable, so like him. She pictured him as a boy, standing protectively by her side whenever Brandon's teasing became too sharp. "What will we do?" she asked, searching Rhaegar's eyes. He hesitated. "I can send you to safety, possibly to Dragonstone, with guards to see you and Jon safe. If Ned knows you live and named the boy as my son, he might stand down. Or he might not. Robert's vengeance, it still burns. He feels betrayed. Mr. Noah." Lyanna pressed her lips together, brushing her hand across Jon's tuft of hair as he slumbered. "We can't run forever, and I don't want to hide Jon away like a secret. I want him to be acknowledged. By the realm, by my brother." Her voice quivered. "Ned will understand. He must." Rhaegar exhaled, gently cupping her chin, his violet eyes full of a tender sadness. "I worry that we're running out of time. My father grows more erratic, and Robert's fury only grows with every victory. If we cannot find a resolution soon, the realm will shatter." "Vemitir." She clung to his hand, seeking his comfort. Jon stirred in his cradle, letting out a soft cry. She lifted him, pressing him to her shoulder, humming softly until he quieted. She felt in that moment a fierce certainty that she would face whatever storm came. She would do it for Jon, for the fragile hope he represented, for the chance that her family might one day be whole again. As dusk fell, a hush settled upon the fortress. In the gloom of the corridor, Lyanna could hear the faint clang of practice swords, the shuffle of armor, the low voices of men preparing for whatever might come. She felt a stirring in her own soul, a sense of inevitability. She had publicly named Jon, her Targaryen son, and in doing so, had set events in motion that could not be undone. The realm would soon find itself divided over this small bundle of life, seeing in him a symbol of everything that might be wrong or right with the future. She sat in the corner of her chamber, rocking Jon in her arms, humming a soft northern tune. Rhaegar lingered by the window, the last rays of daylight touching his silver hair. He looked both regal and sorrowful, a man standing on the edge of a dream that he had once believed was promised to him. In the corridor beyond, footsteps approached, and the door creaked open. It was Sir Oswell when again, his expression grave. "My prince," he said, bowing. "We have received another raven. Lord Stark demands an audience." Lyanna's heart leapt. She looked to Rhaegar, uncertain whether to be overjoyed or fearful. "Helm's here?" she asked. Sir Oswell glanced her way. "His letter suggests he is willing to parley, but he wishes to see his sister in person, to confirm her safety himself." Rhaegar took a long moment to answer. His gaze flicked to Lyanna, then to Jon, then back to Sir Oswell. "Very well," he said softly. "We will arrange it." In the silence that followed, Lyanna felt a mixture of anticipation and dread swirl in her belly. She hadn't seen Ned since she'd fled Winterfell, a lifetime ago it seemed. Would he hate her for defying the betrothal to Robert? Would he condemn her for taking up with Rhaegar, for forging a child that might widen the realm's rifts? Or would his fierce love for his sister remain unbroken? She clutched Jon tighter, pressing a kiss to his warm head. If her brother wished to see her safe, if he wished to see the boy she had named for Targaryen blood, then so be it. She would stand firm in her choice. She was done hiding. She would meet Ned with head held high, wearing the mantle of mother and Stark and Targaryen consort. The realm might break, but she would not. Late that night, as storms raged outside, Lyanna stood by a candle's flickering light and gazed at her sleeping son. Every so often lightning would illuminate the chamber, bright as day for an instant, and her breath would catch at the shadows, dancing across Jon's small face. His chest rose and fell in a gentle rhythm that reminded her of the snows in Winterfell, silent and pure. She shivered, thinking of the roads her brother would travel, the armies that might stand in his way, the uncertain times that had brought them all to this pass. She did not sleep much. Instead, she stood over Jon's cradle, humming lullabies, murmuring old stories about the direwolves of the north and the dragons of old Valyria. She spoke as if the babe could understand every word, weaving a tapestry of heritage and hope. And though she felt a tremor of fear for what awaited them, she did not waver in her determination. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of agency in her life. She had named him. She had chosen to stand by Rhaegar. And she would stand now in the open for all to see. Morning came with a golden hue, slipping through the narrow window. The storm had passed, leaving behind wet stone and a crispness in the air. Lyanna inhaled that fresh scent as she watched the courtyard below. Soldiers were already marching out in formation, gear clanking, a sign that something was afoot. She dreaded the possibility of further bloodshed, but perhaps a parley with Ned would offer a different outcome. She heard movement behind her and turned to see Rhaegar awake, his hair disheveled, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Any word?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Not yet. They say Ned Stark is still at least a day's ride away, maybe two. In these times, anything can happen." He rose from the bed, crossing to where she stood, his gaze falling upon the still sleeping Jon. A faint smile curved his lips. "I dreamed of him last night," Rhaegar said, voice low. He was grown, standing in a hall of many pillars, a sword of light in his hand, the banners of Stark and Targaryen united above him. Lyanna's heart fluttered. She placed a hand on Rhaegar's arm. "Your dreams have always guided you," she said, recalling the many times he mentioned prophecy. "Let's hope this is a good omen." He nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "I will do whatever it takes to see that dream become reality." A rap on the door startled them, and when it opened, one of Rhaegar's captains entered with urgent tidings. The prince excused himself, already wearing the weight of command on his shoulders. Lyanna watched him leave, feeling both a swell of pride and an ache of loneliness. War pressed in from all sides, yet here she remained, a mother guarding her child, a quiet island of peace in a sea of turmoil. She sank into a chair by Jon's cradle, gently stroking his warm cheek. He stirred, eyes opening for a moment to reveal a deep, dark gaze that reminded her so painfully of her own Stark heritage. Tears pricked at her eyes, a blend of fierce love and foreboding. She had named him openly, and in that naming, laid claim to a future as uncertain as the shifting clouds. She prayed the realm would not punish him for the circumstances of his birth. In the corridor, new footsteps echoed. Another day of planning, of worry, of whispered updates. Another day closer to the moment Ned Stark would stand before her. Lyanna wondered if Robert would come too. Her pulse raced with conflicting emotions. She forced herself to remain steady for Jon's sake. He needed a calm mother, one who would protect him from the swirl of adult madness that would shape his youth. She took a deep, steadying breath. Outside, the fortress hummed with activity, the swirl of life continuing even as storms of war gathered at every border. Inside, she cradled her infant prince, mindful that his birth had lit a beacon of hope or fury, depending on who gazed upon it. She closed her eyes, allowing the hush of the morning to cradle them both, whispering a silent vow that no matter what doom might befall the realm, she would stand by her choice, by her son, by his father. She would see this through publicly, unashamed, forging a new truth in a world that so desperately needed it. And as the day warmed, the light through the shutters shifting in slow patterns across the floor, Lyanna felt certain that for better or worse, the realm's fate would soon pivot on this tiny babe named Jon Targaryen. She tightened her hold, kissed his brow, and let the sunrise wash over them, clinging to the fragile moment of peace in a time that had so little of it. She had named him, and there was no turning back now. In that single, irrevocable act, she had embraced a future of uncertainty, but also of possibility. One that might just redeem the sins of the past and bind together the blood of dragons and wolves. Lyanna rested in the hush of her chamber with Jon asleep in her arms, the morning warmth pouring over them in pale ribbons of light. Each day felt like a whispered promise and a creeping dread. The midwife had come and gone, praising the baby's steady growth and Lyanna's resilient spirit. Outside the fortress walls, she heard the clang of sword drills, the crisp bark of officers calling out formations. Preparations for the next conflict that loomed on the horizon. Everywhere was the press of urgency, a tension that made the air quiver as though it could fracture at a word. Rhaegar spent his mornings closeted with his captains, reading ravens from various corners of Westeros. They pored over the uncertain allegiances of the realm, the cunning of lords who might hide their true loyalties, until the winning side was clear. Each day he would return to Lyanna with new tidings, his face carved by care and half-lit with the faint hope that Ned Stark might arrive peacefully. The fortress staff skirted around them both, as if afraid to disturb whatever sacred vow had been made. For indeed the vow was sealed. Jon was named, and the realm would soon learn that Stark and Targaryen blood ran in his veins. Late one afternoon, as Lyanna paced the length of her private corridor with Jon in a sling across her chest, she glimpsed the old steward, Willem, hurrying past. He bowed with curt politeness and seemed eager to avoid lingering. Lyanna paused, feeling the weight of Jon pressing against her collarbone. She remembered the steward's stooped posture when he had first received her months ago. How uncertain he'd been about keeping her identity hidden. Now, she sensed he was even more unsettled. With a quiet resolve, she called out his name. He turned, reluctant, his drooping eyes fixed on Jon's tiny head. She could see the lines of disapproval on his brow, but behind them lay something softer, a measure of compassion perhaps. She approached him slowly. "Is there news?" she asked, voice cautious, hoping he might share what was spoken in the common quarters. Often, servants knew the realm's pulse better than lords, for they heard rumors traded in kitchens and alleys. Willem bowed again, though awkwardly. "My lady, it's said your brother rides with a small company, 15 or so men, flying a Stark banner. They're nearing the outskirts of the Prince's Pass." "Now," Lyanna exhaled, a quiver running through her. "Thank you. You've heard no mention of Robert Baratheon accompanying them?" Willem shook his head. "Lord Stark is said to travel with only men of the North. Lord Robert remains elsewhere. Some speak of him marching toward King's Landing." Others say he's forging an alliance with House Tyrell." She nodded, sifting through the scraps of rumor. Relief washed over her that Robert was not coming here personally. Even the thought of facing his fury, his heartbreak, brought a chill. "Thank you," she murmured again. He bowed and left her in the corridor. She listened to the echo of his footsteps fade. In the hush that followed, she glanced down at Jon, nestled against her. His eyelids fluttered in a dream, oblivious to the swirl of events that might soon shape his life. She returned to her chambers, placing Jon gently in his cradle. The daylight slanted in a honeyed glow across the flagstones, and dust motes swirled in the air. She found herself drifting in thought, imagining Ned's face. She recalled it from a happier time, before Brandon's tragic death, before war had claimed their father's life. Ned always had that quiet strength, that solemn sense of duty. Would he see the child in her arms and understand that she had chosen this path freely, out of love and a conviction that the realm needed a child born of ice and fire? Or would he see only betrayal? A soft rap sounded on the door. She admitted Rhaegar, who entered in his usual swirl of silver hair and earnest worry. He moved closer, checking on Jon with the faintest trace of a smile, before taking Lyanna's hands. "I've just spoken with the scouts," he said. "Your brother approaches, and has sent word he wishes no bloodshed. He will come under a banner of truce." Lyanna closed her eyes, relief mingling with tension. "Then he's near. How soon?" "Tomorrow by midday, perhaps a bit later." He squeezed her hands, warmth traveling between them like a silent comfort. "We'll receive him in the small courtyard. I've arranged for enough men to ensure no treachery occurs, but also to put his mind at ease. I have no wish to provoke him." She nodded, her chest tight with anticipation. "I must greet him," she whispered. "He'll want to see me first, to know I'm safe." A small tremor ran through her at the thought of that first moment, how Ned's gray eyes might bore into her. But she stood by her choice. She would not hide in her chambers like some scandalous secret. Rhaegar brushed his fingers through her hair, expression pained yet resolute. "Tomorrow then. We'll stand by you." Night fell in restless quiet. Lyanna dozed off and on, jostled awake each time Jon let out a soft whimper. Each time, she nursed him, or soothed him back to sleep, feeling an acute tenderness in her heart for this small life, caught between kingdoms. The hours dragged, and she found herself lying on her side, eyes open in the dimness, listening to the wind moan outside the fortress walls. She wondered if Ned was doing the same, somewhere on the rocky roads of Dorne, thinking of her, wrestling with the demands of war. Eventually the sky lightened, and the fortress stirred. Lyanna rose, washed her face in cool water, and dressed in a simple gown of pale blue wool, the color reminiscent of winter roses. It was not the regal garb of a Targaryen consort, nor was it the plain attire of a captive. It was something in between, a quiet statement that she was still a Stark, even as she claimed a Targaryen child. She gently swaddled Jon and carried him close. The midwife murmured gentle cautions about not tiring herself, but Lyanna waved them away. This was her moment, and she would not shrink from it. Word came mid-morning that Ned's party had been sighted. Lyanna breathed steadily, battling the hammer of her heart. Rhaegar, already donned in a light mail shirt and cloak, lingered near the keep's entrance, flanked by King's Guard in pale armor. She noticed Sir Oswell went standing with a hand on the hilt of his sword, posture tense. Others milled about behind them, uncertain and wary. When Lyanna emerged carrying Jon, a hush settled, all eyes flicking to the babe. She made her way to Rhaegar's side, the slight weight of Jon reassuring against her body. Outside in the courtyard, sunlight spilled over the sandstone walls, revealing a patch of flattened earth where Ned Stark would soon arrive. The fortress gate stood open, the portcullis raised, though armed men stood at intervals, ready in case this parley went sour. Lyanna's stomach twisted at the sight of so many drawn faces, each anticipating a confrontation. Some were loyal to the Targaryens and looked upon the approaching Northerners as enemies. Others seemed uncertain, shifting from foot to foot as they awaited orders. Dust kicked up from beyond the gates. Then they appeared, men dressed in sturdy riding leathers bearing the direwolf sigil. Some had ragged edges to their cloaks, evidence of long travel. In the lade rode a tall, lean figure in simpler garb, Ned Stark. His hair was darker than she remembered, or perhaps it was just the dust of the road dulling its sheen. He sat his horse with the straight-backed ease of a soldier, his expression grave. Seeing him caused Lyanna's breath to catch painfully in her throat. She held Jon closer, bracing for whatever reaction might unfold. As Ned and his men drew nearer, Rhaegar lifted a hand, calling for stillness. The courtyard fell silent, but for the shuffle of hooves. Ned dismounted, handing his reins to a companion, and stared at Rhaegar with a stoicism that reminded Lyanna painfully of their father. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ned's gaze swept across the crowd and found Lyanna. Their eyes locked. She felt the force of his concern, his confusion, and perhaps a flicker of relief. She wanted to run to him, but some unseen barrier of caution kept her rooted. Rhaegar stepped forward. "Lord Stark," he said evenly, voice carrying in the still air. "You come under a banner of truce?" Ned inclined his head, jaw clenched. "I'm to see my sister, and to ensure no harm has come to her. We have no quarrel unless forced upon us." Lyanna summoned her courage. She broke away from Rhaegar's side, ignoring the subtle shift of the Kingsguard, and approached Ned. Jon stirred in her arms, letting out a small sound of discomfort at the sudden movement. Her heart pounded as she halted within arm's reach of her brother. She saw him looking not at her, but at the bundle in her arms. His brows furrowed, as though confronting a puzzle he had never wanted to solve. "Lyanna," Ned said softly, "you're safe." She could not fight the tears that pricked at her eyes. "I'm safe, Ned, and this is my son, Jon Targaryen." She let the name hang in the dusty air. A murmur rippled through Ned's men, but they held their positions, uncertain how to respond. Ned's face, though carefully schooled, showed a flash of heartache. He looked at the child, then at Lyanna, and finally at Rhaegar, whose expression remained cautious but determined. Ned drew a breath, stifling the swirl of emotions that seemed poised to break free. "You named him," he whispered, anger flickering behind the guarded mask of his features. "You named him Targaryen. Are you truly Rhaegar's?" Lyanna braced herself, shifting her arms so that Ned could better see the sleeping infant. "He's my son, Ned. Ours. Rhaegar and I chose this." Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to hold steady. "I know what you must think. That I was stolen, that I was forced, but you have to hear me. I chose this path." "Darling." A wave of shock flickered across Ned's eyes, quickly replaced by sorrow. He gestured for his men to remain where they were, and closed the distance with Lyanna. Gently he touched her arm, as though verifying she was real. "You ran away. You left Robert behind. War has broken out because of it. Father and Brandon." His voice cracked, and he halted. "Do you have any idea what has happened in your absence?" She met his gaze, tears threatening to spill. "I know, Ned. I heard. Brandon, father. They're gone. I can't begin to express my grief. I never meant for any of this to happen. But I swear to you, I was never abducted. I was never harmed. Never." Ned pressed his lips together, glancing again at Jon. "He looks like you," he murmured, noting the baby's dark hair. "So small. So helpless. And you say he bears Targaryen blood?" Lyanna nodded, her throat tight. "He does. That's why I named him openly, so the realm wouldn't see him as some bastard of a secret union. He's of the North and of the Dragon. He is my son, and I love him." "Nadas." Ned's eyes glistened, and he turned slightly, his gaze flicking toward Rhaegar. "You sparked a war, Prince Rhaegar. My father and brother died. Our houses are drenched in blood. How can I look upon this child without seeing the cost?" His voice, though steady, quivered at the edges. Rhaegar approached slowly, aware that one misstep could shatter the fragile calm. "Lord Stark, I do not deny my part in what has transpired. I loved your sister, and I believed our union might serve the realm in ways not yet understood. I had hoped events would not spiral into this tragedy, but I cannot undo what has been done. Now. Ned's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Lyanna feared he might strike Rhaegar or demand retribution. But then Ned turned back to Lyanna, placing a careful hand over the cloth swaddling Jon. My sister, I want to protect you. I want our family to heal. But do you understand the danger you and this child face? Robert will not rest. He hates Targaryens. He hates what he sees as your betrayal. Lyanna nodded, tears slipping free at last. I know. And that's why I need you, Ned. I need you to believe me when I say this child must live. He might represent the chance for peace. If not now, then in time. Ned studied her for a long moment, and in his silence, the tension in the courtyard seemed to deepen. Finally, his shoulders slumped and he sighed. The realm has suffered enough. Lyanna, I'll do what I can to keep you safe, for our family's sake. But Robert's wrath is not easily tempered. Rhaegar stepped closer, lifting his chin with regal composure. If we can reach an accord with the North, perhaps others will follow. The Tyrells, the Martells. There might be a path to end the bloodshed without further ruin. Memnesirat. Ned shook his head, weariness etched into his face. King Aerys will never yield. Every day I hear new tales of his cruelty. The lords who once stood by him turn away in disgust or fear. He's threatened wildfire on the entire city. My sister, you're aligning with a man whose father has lost all reason. Even if Robert stands down, do you think the realm... A hush followed. Lyanna's gaze flicked to Rhaegar, who looked as though he carried the weight of every twisted thread in this war. His next words came softly. I have considered every possibility. My father is beyond saving, but if I were to take the throne, if the realm would accept me in his stead, then perhaps we could salvage what's left. Ned's eyebrows rose, a sudden wariness shadowing his expression. You speak of usurping your own father. Rhaegar exhaled. No one wants to speak the word usurp. But if my father continues on this path, there will be no realm to inherit. The only hope is to remove him from power, or else watch Robert take King's Landing by force. Either path risks immense bloodshed. I have no illusions about this, but I will do whatever it takes to protect Lyanna and our son, and to protect the innocent lives father would sacrifice on his pyromancer's whims. Ned regarded the prince with grim doubt. How do I know you won't become like your father, or that your son won't? Targaryens have always spoken of destiny, but what destiny led us here, to the brink of ruin? Lyanna laid a trembling hand on her brother's sleeve. Ned, please, trust me. Rhaegar is not Aerys. You knew me once. I wouldn't have given my heart to a monster. Ned ran? She saw Ned soften at her plea, though bitterness still flickered in his eyes. He nodded once, stepping back. I'll stay for a while, observe this fortress and the men you command. I want to see for myself that Lyanna is treated with respect, that no harm befalls her, and I want to judge your intentions, Prince Rhaegar. Rhaegar bowed his head. That is fair. We shall ensure your men find lodging. But I ask in return that there be no violence within these walls. My men are wary of you, and you of them. We must keep the peace, or risk all. Ned considered, then turned to his followers. We accept. Let us lay down arms while within these walls, unless threatened. A subtle exhalation of relief spread through the courtyard. Lyanna saw Rhaegar's shoulders ease. The Kingsguard, still watchful, drew back. Some of Ned's men tentatively guided their horses to the stables. It was an uneasy stillness, but it was a start. Lyanna found herself near tears again, uncertain whether to cry out in gratitude or fear. For now, Ned was here, willing to listen. That alone felt like a victory. She gestured for him to follow her inside. Rhaegar kept a respectful distance, letting brother and sister walk side by side. Jon stirred, releasing a tiny, plaintive cry. Ned frowned, stopping in the corridor to peer at the child's scrunched face. Lyanna couldn't help a small laugh, the tension of the courtyard echoing in her chest. "He's hungry," she murmured, turning her gaze up to Ned. "Would you like to hold him for a moment?" Ned stiffened, as though she had offered him a live ember. But then his eyes gentled, and he carefully extended his arms. Lyanna transferred Jon into them, supporting his little head. Ned stared down at the baby, eyes full of so many unsaid things. Sorrow for the lost wonder at new life, fear of what the future held. Jon let out another cry, and Ned's stiff posture melted into an awkward attempt to soothe him. He rocked from side to side, brow knitted with concern. "He's so small," Ned whispered, as though speaking might break a spell. "I've never held a babe so young." Lyanna's throat tightened with emotion. "He was born not long ago, and the realm already trembles because he exists. But to me, he's just Jon, my sweet boy who needs warmth and love." "Timon." Ned glanced at her, eyes glistening. "You always had a tender heart, Lyanna. Brandon used to tease you for chasing after pups in the yard. He said you cared more for strays than for your own lessons." A faint, bittersweet smile ghosted across Ned's face. "I see that side of you now. I don't doubt your love for him. I only doubt if the realm will ever accept him." Lyanna swallowed. "They may not. But I won't hide in the shadows. This is my truth. And if we can forge peace, maybe the realm will learn to accept him too." "None." Ned shifted Jon gently back into Lyanna's arms, then pressed a palm over his face as if rubbing away a building headache. "I'd like to rest. My men are travel-worn." She nodded, understanding. Together they walked deeper into the fortress, past the open colonnades that overlooked the stark Dornish mountains, until they reached a suite of guest chambers once occupied by visiting lords. Lyanna summoned the steward, who gave a stiff bow and promised to prepare accommodations for the Northern Company. Ned gave only a curt nod, still grappling with his swirling thoughts. Before he went inside, Lyanna touched his arm once more. "Thank you for trusting me enough to come," she whispered. "I know it can't have been easy." He regarded her with a mixture of brotherly affection and haunted regret. "I only hope it's not too late for any of us." He disappeared into the chamber, leaving Lyanna in the corridor with Jon Fussy in her arms. She soothed the child absently, her mind teeming with questions about Ned's next steps. She knew he couldn't simply renounce Robert or the North's cause without consequence. But for now, they had at least reached a fragile pause. She pressed a gentle kiss to Jon's forehead, then moved to her own chambers, where the midwife helped calm the baby, leaving Lyanna to sink into a chair by the window. Outside, the sun blazed hot upon the fortress walls, and she felt the weight of the day's confrontation settle in her bones. Rhaegar found her there an hour later. He stepped inside quietly, shutting the door behind him, and took in the sight of mother and child. Jon had finally dozed off, his small mouth slack, fists curled near his cheeks. Lyanna leaned her head back against the carved wooden chair, eyes half closed, exhaustion pulling at her. She offered Rhaegar a faint smile, though her heart still pounded with the echoes of her meeting with Ned. He walked over, knelt at her side, and stroked her hair. "You did well," he whispered. "Your brother seems an honorable man." She let out a sigh that bordered on a sob. "He's honorable. He's also bound by duty to the North, to Robert. Our house lost so much, Rhaegar. Ned might never forgive you for the part you played, even if he understands our love. Blood demands justice." "Niece?" Rhaegar's gaze fell to the stone floor, shadowed by regret. "I wish I could bring your father and brother back. I wish none of this had happened. But I can't undo fate. I can only strive to set the realm on a better course." They stayed silent for a time, listening to Jon's small breaths. Eventually, Rhaegar stood and drew her up gently. "Will you walk with me? I'd like to show you something that might give you hope." She nodded, curiosity piqued. He led her out through a maze of corridors until they reached an unassuming door on the fortress' eastern flank. A sentry stood guard, but at Rhaegar's signal, he stepped aside, allowing them entry. The room inside smelled of parchment and dust. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with old tomes and scrolls, an archive of sorts. A single window admitted a pillar of light that illuminated motes of dust swirling in the air. Rhaegar guided Lyanna to a wooden table near the center, where a single large tome lay open. Its pages were filled with genealogies and half-faded writing. She stared at it, seeing the scrawled names of Targaryen ancestors, marriages that linked the Dragon Kings to other great houses over centuries. Rhaegar turned a few pages, pausing at a long column of recorded births. Some lines had been struck through, others annotated. "I've been studying these," he said quietly, running his fingertips across the old ink. "Here's proof that House Targaryen's line has intersected with other families before, a weaving of blood and allegiances. We're not as removed from the rest of Westeros as many would believe. This child, Jon, he's another thread in that tapestry, perhaps the strongest yet. Stark blood is as ancient as any in the realm." Lyanna traced the lines with her gaze, her heart aching with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. "This is what you dreamt of, isn't it? A uniting of the realm through some prophesied child?" He looked at her, eyes haunted by old convictions. "I was raised on stories of the prince that was promised, a hero who might ward off the darkness that lies beyond our mortal sight. I believed it would be Aegon, my first son. But in my dreams, I saw a child born of both the ice of the north and the fire of the dragon. You must understand, Lyanna, it's not just prophecy that drew me to you. But it was a piece of why I took the risk, why I believed so strongly that our union could be a force for good." No. She lowered her gaze, recalling the moment he'd placed the crown of winter roses on her head at Harrenhal, how his voice trembled with meaning beyond the pageantry. She wondered if he had known then how much his action would reshape the realm. If Jon is truly to be that child, the prince that was promised, he deserves a chance to live without the shadow of constant war. But will the realm grant him that? Rhaegar pressed her hands between his, warmth flooding her weary limbs. "I don't know, but I will fight for it. And if we can gain your brother's support, it might be enough to convince other northern lords, the Riverlands, perhaps even House Tully. The realm is tired of the Mad Kin's tyranny and the endless bloodshed. Maybe we can make them see reason." She wanted to believe him. The old records, the swirl of dust in the sunlight, the hush of a fortress on the brink of war. It all felt precarious and hopeful in equal measure. Jon stirred in her arms, letting out a small grunt that broke the silence. She smiled down at him, brushing a hand across his velvety cheek. "We'll fight for him," she said softly. "He deserves nothing less." They left the archive together, a renewed sense of purpose guiding them. Outside, the fortress buzzed with careful interactions between Targaryen loyalists and the northern soldiers. Guards from both camps watched each other warily, but Rhaegar's orders kept them from open hostility. Lyanna saw Ned striding along a covered walkway, examining the fortress defenses, speaking in hushed tones with one of his men. She felt a pang of longing for the closeness they'd once shared as siblings, riding across the fields of Winterfell, chasing each other through drifting snow. She found him later in a spare courtyard, standing by a cluster of Dornish plants that drooped under the midday sun. He turned when she arrived, nodding at Jon in her arms. His face was solemn, but there was a softness there she hadn't seen before. She realized that, little by little, the baby's presence might be winning Ned over. No matter the war's grim demands, a newborn evoked compassion that was hard to extinguish. They stood side by side for a time, neither speaking. Lyanna inhaled the dusty scent of the courtyard, feeling the dryness of the Dornish air scrape her throat. Ned finally broke the hush with a question that made her heart skip. "When did this begin, Lyanna? You and Rhaegar? Was it truly during the tourney at Harrenhal?" "Forced." She shifted Jon, who squirmed in her arms, and faced Ned. "He and I spoke only briefly at first, but something in his eyes drew me. He seemed lonely. Our conversations became confessions, almost. Then he gave me those winter roses, and I couldn't stop thinking about him. I knew it was wrong, that I was betrothed to Robert, but part of me kept believing that Rhaegar needed me, and that maybe I needed him." Ned's lips pressed together. "Robert loved you, or as close to love as he could manage. But he also loved the idea of you, the beauty and the thrill. Perhaps you saw something more in Rhaegar." And then, she nodded, surprised by Ned's insight. Robert cared for me in his own way, but it was always a loud, consuming sort of love. Rhaegar was different. He had a quiet sadness that mirrored my own. I can't explain it well, Ned, but I felt I couldn't turn from that sadness once I recognized it. Ned examined her face, searching for the sister he once knew. I only wish you'd told me. So many might have been spared if we'd known the truth. Instead, Father and Brandon went to King's Landing, outraged, demanding your return, and the Mad King murdered them. None. Tears burned her eyes. She wanted to fall against him, cry out her guilt and sorrow, but she held herself in check, mindful of the child. I'm sorry, she managed, voice cracked. I never wanted that. I never imagined it would come to this. He sighed, glancing at Joan, who let out a small coo. The baby's wide, dark eyes peeked up at Ned, as though curious about this newcomer. Ned tentatively touched Joan's tiny hand, letting the baby's fingers curl around one of his own. The sight of it made Lyanna's heart swell, and for a moment, they were just brother and sister, welcoming a new life into their family. It's done, Ned said quietly. No one can undo it. All we can do is move forward. I want to hate him for what's happened, but I see how you look at each other, and I can see he loves the boy, that he wants to end the suffering. Maybe that's worth something. She breathed out, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Thank you. He withdrew his hand, face growing grave again. Robert will not see it that way. He's out for Targaryen blood. That includes Jon. What will you do if he wins this war? If King's Landing falls? If Rhaegar can't unseat his father or broker peace? Naum. She pressed her lips together, a quiet panic stirring in her belly. She knew that scenario was too real to dismiss. I don't know. We'd flee, I suppose. Take Jon somewhere safe. I refuse to let Robert slay my son. Ned closed his eyes. I can't promise Robert will spare him if he claims victory. You must understand that any child of Rhaegar's would be a threat to the new order. He'd never allow Jon to live. Lyanna nodded, swallowing bile. She had known it in her bones, but hearing Ned speak it aloud made it too real. Then we have to try for peace, she said. If Rhaegar can calm the realm, if the Targaryen loyalists can rally behind him instead of his father. It's the only way. Ned studied her, and there was a quiet respect in his gaze. You sound like a woman grown, speaking of war and alliances. I still remember you as the girl who loved to ride too fast, her hair streaming behind like a banner. She managed a faint smile. I still miss those days, Ned. Sometimes I wish we could go back. Nah. He placed a hand on her shoulder. So do I. Then he shook his head, heavy with regret. I'll speak with Rhaegar further, and I'll do my best to keep your secret from Robert, if ever we meet. But the truth is already out, in part. You named Jon publicly. That's a bell that can't be unrung. She steadied herself. I won't run from my choice. He's ours. Let the realm know it. Ned nodded, solemn, and together they walked back inside. Day turned to dusk, the fortress settling into a rhythm of cautious acceptance. Northern men shared an uneasy space with Targaryen loyalists, each side wary but refraining from violence. Rhaegar oversaw discreet negotiations, drafting letters to send to potential allies. The notion of removing Aerys from the throne lingered in many conversations, whispered behind closed doors. Lyanna spent those days mostly in her chambers with Jon, but Ned visited often, sharing stories of Winterfell, of how the North fared. She told him of her time in hiding, of the vigil she kept while waiting for Jon to be born. Little by little, a fragile bond began to mend between them. He even smiled once or twice at Jon's infant antics, the flailing arms and gurgled coos. Still, she sensed the unspoken heaviness in Ned's eyes whenever Robert's name came up. Late in the evening, a few days into Ned's stay, a raven arrived from King's Landing. Lyanna learned of it only when Rhaegar burst into their chamber. Breathless, a letter clutched in his hand. She had been singing softly to Jon, trying to lull him to sleep. Ned was there, watching from the corner, face tender and guarded. Rhaegar's sudden appearance startled them both. "It's from one of my informants in the Red Keep," he said, voice shaking. "My father, he's ordered the pyromancers to stockpile wildfire beneath the city. It's worse than we feared. He truly means to burn King's Landing if the rebels breach the gates." Ned stood, alarm flaring in his eyes. He'd slaughter thousands of innocents just for the sake of vengeance? Rhaegar nodded, looking stricken. "He would, unless we stop him. If Robert's army reaches the city, if the Lannisters turn coat, Father might give the order." "Names." Lyanna clutched Jon closer, heart racing. A vivid image of green flame engulfing streets and homes, men and women and children, shrieking in the conflagration, seared into her mind. She glanced at Ned, who looked equally horrified. "What can we do?" Rhaegar set the letter aside, pacing in agitation. "We have no time to muster a large force here. The only chance is if I ride to King's Landing with loyal troops, attempt to seize control before Father can act. But that means leaving you here, unguarded, with the knowledge that Robert's men could eventually come this way." "Namna did you know?" Ned spoke urgently. "I could return north, gather more troops to counter Robert's approach. But that would leave Lyanna vulnerable. We can't let her face the possibility of Robert's wrath on her own." Lyanna took a shaky breath. "We could go to Starfall or another Dornish stronghold. But would that truly keep us safe? War is spreading everywhere." Rhaegar paused, his face set in grim determination. "We may have no choice. I must go to King's Landing. I must stop my father before he destroys the city. Perhaps I can rally the City Watch or the small folk to our cause. If we dethrone him, the realm might yet accept me as king and call a halt to the fighting." "Melinorn." Ned regarded him, torn. "I'll stand by you if it means saving innocent lives. But I have to be sure Lyanna and the child are safe." Rhaegar looked to Lyanna, his voice full of a fierce tenderness. "Come with me then. Both of you. We'll gather what men we have, ride straight for the capital. If we succeed, you'll be under my protection. If we fail, the realm will be lost anyway." "Namisamain." Lyanna's blood chilled at the prospect of traveling with a newborn into a war zone. But the alternative, remaining behind while Rhaegar faced the Mad King alone, felt equally perilous. Jon stirred in her arms, pressing his tiny fists against her breast, as though sensing her alarm. Ned paced, clearly weighing every option. "We could send her to the north, to hide with our people." Lyanna shook her head vehemently. "Robert might march there next, or he might intercept me on the road." "No, Ned, if the city is about to burn, if thousands will die, we can't just run. Maybe we can help prevent it." "Me." Rhaegar's shoulders eased slightly. "I hate to bring you into danger, but if you remain, you risk being caught between Robert's armies and my father's madness. With me, at least I can protect you. We can keep Jon close, ensure no harm befalls him." Ned lifted his gaze to his sister, voice wavering. "Is this truly what you want? To ride into the lion's den, with a child so young?" She cradled Jon, trying to quell the trembling in her chest. "I want to stand by Rhaegar. And if saving King's Landing means preventing a massacre, I can't just stay hidden. It's not only our family we're fighting for. It's the realm. And..." She hesitated, tears pricking her eyes. "I've already lost too much family. I won't be parted from Rhaegar again. Not with this threat looming." Ned nodded slowly, seeing her resolve. "Then I will ride with you. The North deserves better than a mad king or a war-crazed rebel. If seizing King's Landing peacefully is possible, I'll do what I can to help." Rhaegar inhaled, relief and anxiety tangling in his features. He placed a hand on Ned's shoulder, the other reaching to touch Lyanna's. "We must plan swiftly. We'll depart soon with a small but loyal force. There's no time to wait for reinforcements. If we delay, it could cost thousands of lives." They spent that night in hurried preparations. Armor was polished, horses were readied, supplies loaded onto wagons. Lyanna's heart pounded with each passing hour, imagining the dangerous road ahead. She fed Jon and rocked him to sleep one final time in the relative peace of the fortress. Ned arranged for his men to accompany them, forging a tenuous alliance with Rhaegar's own. The corridors bustled with uneasy but determined faces, men steeling themselves for a mission that might end in triumph or disaster. Before dawn, Lyanna stood on a balcony overlooking the courtyard. The horizon glowed faintly, a line of pale gold against the star-flecked sky. She clutched Jon to her chest, the chilly breeze catching stray wisps of her hair. Her gown felt too thin, or perhaps it was simply the dread coursing through her that made her shiver. She thought of the crypts of Winterfell, of her father and Brandon entombed there, and silently vowed that this child would not be another casualty. Rhaegar joined her on the balcony. He was dressed for battle, a silver breastplate engraved with the three-headed dragon sigil. His sword belt gleamed in the growing light, yet his expression softened at the sight of Lyanna and Jon, and he wrapped an arm around them both, drawing them close. She sank into that moment, inhaling the familiar scent of leather and steel, and the faint trace of rosemary that clung to his cloak. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Yes, but I'd be more afraid if we did nothing. We have to try." He nodded, pressing a tender kiss to her hair. "I won't let anyone harm either of you. Whatever it takes, I promise." She held him tighter, tears stinging her eyes. Dawn broke over the fortress, the sky filling with delicate pastels. The courtyard below came alive with the clink of bridles and the shuffle of boots. Ned was there, speaking with some of his men, the Stark banner stirring gently in the wind beside the Targaryen sigil. Lyanna couldn't help but marvel at the sight. The direwolf and the dragon, side by side, if only for a fragile moment. She felt Jon wiggle, and she glanced down to find his dark eyes fluttering open as though disturbed by the noise. She smiled and tucked him closer, allowing him to rest against her heart. This was their child, named before the realm as a Targaryen, loved by both Stark and dragon, and held in the arms of parents who would risk a kingdom's wrath for his sake. She kissed his forehead, whispering a silent vow to protect him as best she could. They descended the stairs to the courtyard. The first rays of sun caught on Rhaegar's armor, and the men straightened at the prince's approach. Lyanna stood beside Ned, who glanced at her with cautious resolve. The men parted to allow her a mount, a gentle palfrey she had grown familiar with during her months here. Rhaegar assisted her, careful as she balanced Jon in a secure sling, then climbed onto his own warhorse, a sleek gray stallion. Trumpets sounded softly in the morning hush, a signal to open the gates. Those leaving included not just soldiers but a handful of servants, baggage carts, and extra mounts for any they might lose. The fortress staff watched from windows and walkways, uncertain whether they would see their prince and his lady again, or whether rumors of this journey would ignite another kind of battle. None spoke the words aloud, but all knew the stakes. Ned led his northerners in a loose formation near the front, while Rhaegar and the Kingsguard rode at the center, flanking Lyanna. Died. She kept Jon secure against her, feeling the child's warmth through the layers of cloth. She only hoped the roads would be kind, that her baby would not suffer too greatly from the strain of travel. When the portcullis groaned upward, a shaft of golden morning light flooded in, paving the path ahead. Hooves clopped onto the dusty ground beyond the fortress. A hush fell over the procession as they ventured into the winding pass that would lead them north and east, toward King's Landing. Each turn of the path revealed craggy rocks and looming cliff faces. The wind whistled low, as if whispering warnings of what lay ahead. Lyanna glanced back at the fortress, its stone towers fading behind them. She wondered if she would ever return, or if the next time she saw these walls, the realm would be forever changed. They rode onward, day unfurling across the rugged Dornish landscape. The men spoke little, save for brief instructions or hushed speculation about what they might face in the capital. Some prayed quietly, fingering amulets for good fortune. Others kept watch for bandits or scouts who might wish to halt a Targaryen convoy. Lyanna stayed near Rhaegar, Ned just ahead, her entire being focused on protecting Jon. Each bump in the road jolted her, but the child slept fitfully, lulled by the motion. By midday, they reached a narrow gorge where a trickle of water ran over polished stones. They paused long enough for the horses to drink, for the men to share bread and dried figs. Lyanna dismounted with Rhaegar's help, her legs shaky, her arms stiff from holding Jon. A light breeze fluttered her hair as she found a shady spot near the trickling water. Ned joined her, face still drawn in thought. "I wish we had more men," he muttered, glancing at the small force arrayed around them. "Robert's host is said to be in the thousands." Rhaegar dismounted and approached, removing his gauntlets. "Numbers won't help us if we reach the city too late, and my father has set it aflame. We need speed, and the element of surprise." Lyanna bowed her head, brushing dust from Jon's blanket. The baby stirred, letting out a small wail as if complaining of the heat. She rocked him, a bead of sweat trickling down her own temple. "And if we fail?" she asked softly, meeting Rhaegar's gaze. "If your father won't yield?" Rhaegar's eyes were bleak with understanding. "Then I'll do what must be done. I won't let him destroy the city, even if it means—" He faltered, swallowing. "I can't speak it yet, but I'll not allow innocence to burn." Ned nodded soberly. "We'll stand with you in that, at least." He hesitated, glancing at Lyanna. "You and Jon should stay back if things go poorly. We'll find a way to protect you, even if we have to flee in the chaos." Lyanna pressed her lips together. She hated the idea of cowering behind. But she knew that with Jon in her arms, her ability to fight or flee was limited. "I understand," she said, cradling her son's tiny form. They remounted and continued, the terrain gradually shifting from the rocky spires of Dorne into the rolling dryness of the Reach's southern fringes. They would skirt the major roads to avoid detection, traveling in smaller groups to appear less threatening. Each night, they made camp in secluded groves or beside quiet streams. Tensions ran high. Men stood double watches, wary of scouts loyal to Robert or roving bands of brigands. Lyanna took what rest she could. She nursed Jon beneath a starlit sky, the crisp air carrying the faint scent of thyme and pine. Sometimes, Ned would sit nearby, lost in his own quiet reflections of home. Other times, Rhaegar would play a soft tune on a silver-stringed harp he had packed, the notes drifting into the hush of night. She would listen, tears in her eyes, recalling the moment she first heard Rhaegar sing at Harrenhal. Now, the weight of prophecy and war hung over every court. Days bled into one another. The weather grew milder as they headed north, pockets of farmland replacing the barren passes. In the distance, they saw smoke on the horizon. No one could be certain if it was from battles or fields burned by raiders. Rumors reached them via travelers. King's Landing was in turmoil. The Mad King calling for the heads of traitors. Robert rumored to be forging alliances with Tywin Lannister. Lyanna's dread deepened, and she prayed they wouldn't be too late. At last, near the cusp of a cloudy dawn, they topped a rise and glimpsed the Kingswood in the far distance. Beyond that forest lay King's Landing, the seat of Targaryen power, and the place Aerys threatened to destroy rather than lose. Lyanna shivered despite the warmth in the air, her mind conjuring images of green wildfire scorching stone and flesh alike. Jon whimpered in her arms, restless. She kissed his cheek, heart thundering. Rhaegar reined in his horse beside her. The company halted, gazing upon the rolling hills that would lead them to the capital's outskirts. The men exchanged anxious looks, checking weapons, gathering resolve. Ned rode up, the Stark banner flapping behind him in a faint breeze, direwolf Stark on the gray field. Lyanna held Jon close, the child's weight a reminder of all they stood to lose. No horns sounded in greeting. No welcome came from the city walls in the distance, for they were still many leagues away. But Lyanna sensed that the final steps of their journey would decide the fate of them all. A prince trying to salvage his dynasty, a realm on the brink of annihilation, a mother clinging to hope and a brother seeking a future without further bloodshed. She looked down at Jon, swaddled in the half-light, named before all the world as a Targaryen and a Stark. In the hush of that moment, Lyanna whispered a silent plea to the old gods of the north, and whatever new gods might listen in these southern lands. She prayed that the madness would end before all was lost, that the child of ice and fire would live to see a realm united. Slowly, Rhaegar spurred his horse forward, and the company followed, hearts pounding, uncertain if they rode into salvation or the flames of final ruin. "Ekha," They rode through the day beneath a thick, roiling sky. The land between their company and King's Landing seemed to stretch like a silent challenge, each mile a reminder that they were heading into a nest of uncertainty. Occasional farmsteads appeared on the fringes of the road, the fields ragged and untended. Some stood abandoned, wooden shutters banging in a restless wind. Others showed faint signs of life, cautious peasants peering from behind their doors, too fearful to approach travelers in a time of war. Every so often, Lyanna would see a child peeking from a half-broken fence, wide eyes tracking the procession of armed men. She felt the weight of their gazes like a tangible thing, a question. Who were these warriors, and what new violence did they bring? She kept Jon close, snug in a sling that she cradled beneath one arm. He slept often, lulled by the horse's rocking stride, but when he awoke, he fussed at the jostling pace. Each complaint tugged at her heart. She tried to soothe him with gentle murmurs, ignoring the soreness in her own body from days in the saddle. Rhaegar often rode beside her, glancing at the child, ensuring neither mother nor babe was in discomfort. But both of them understood that time was too short for luxury. Ned scouted ahead with a pair of guards, checking each fork in the road, ensuring no hidden threat waited. His presence gave Lyanna some comfort, a link to the north that felt like a tether to her old life. She saw the strain on his face whenever he stopped to speak with Rhaegar, tension etched into the corners of his eyes. For all their uneasy cooperation, Ned and the Targaryen prince were still separated by the memory of dead kin and broken vows. Sometimes, when dusk fell, Lyanna would see them conferring at the camp's edge, voices too low for her to catch. She imagined them discussing routes, hazards, or the shape of the final confrontation. Neither man emerged from those talks looking eased. On the third evening after they sighted the distant Kingswood, they made camp near a shallow stream. Horses were watered, fires lit. The men formed a tight defensive ring, anxious at every rustle in the underbrush. The camp's quiet was broken only by the clinking of buckles, as armor was removed for a brief respite. Above, the sky churned with clouds that flashed silver in the moonlight, promising a storm. Lyanna sat on a fallen log near a small fire, resting Jon in her lap, letting him kick his legs against her gown. Heat radiated from the flames, and she stared into them, lost in thought. A twig snapped behind her, and she glanced back to see Rhaegar approaching with measured steps. He settled beside her on the log, holding a skin of water. She accepted it gratefully, taking a few sips to chase away the day's dust. Jon made a soft, restless sound, so Rhaegar reached to place a hand over the baby's belly, humming a quiet note. Lyanna felt a pang of memory. He used to play gentle melodies on his harp, weaving songs of prophecy. Now, all was overshadowed by the urgency of their mission. She murmured her gratitude, glancing at Rhaegar's face in the firelight. He looked exhausted, dust clinging to his hair, a faint bruise at his jaw from a sparring session earlier in the day. Yet, there was a determination that still burned in his violet eyes. Neither had spoken for several heartbeats when Ned appeared on the other side of the fire. He carried a small wooden bowl of stew, turnips and salted pork. From the smell of it, he held it out to Lyanna wordlessly, and she nodded, shifting Jon so she could spoon a bit of broth without disturbing him. Ned took a seat on a stone, setting his sword belt aside. For a moment, the three of them formed a quiet circle around the flames. The men nearby kept their distance, allowing the princess consort and the prince his privacy, but also respecting Ned Stark, who had become their silent ally for this journey. Their presence was a reminder that no matter how personal their reasons, they could not escape the consequences of leading others into danger. Ned finally broke the silence. "I sent a scout ahead. We're half a day's ride from the Kingswood. Beyond that lies the city. We might arrive by evening tomorrow, if the roads are clear." Rhaegar stared into the dancing flames. "And if they aren't clear?" Ned inhaled sharply. "Then, we move cautiously. Try to avoid any major host. If my information is correct, Robert is coming from another direction. Tywin Lannister's intent remains uncertain. Your father might still have loyalist forces defending the gates, or the Gold Cloaks may close the city to all but the Targaryen banners. It's impossible to say until we're there." Lyanna fed Jon the last of her boiled water from a small skin, careful not to let any dribble. The baby fussed, and she bounced him gently until he quieted. She looked between Ned and Rhaegar. "You'll try to reason with the City Watch?" she asked Rhaegar. "I remember you said they might side with you if they fear your father's madness." He gave a small nod. "If the City Watch sees that I come not as a conqueror, but to prevent slaughter, they may stand aside or even help overthrow my father's loyalists. But it's a risk. My father could have replaced key officers with men who fear him more than they care for the city." Ned brushed a hand through his hair. "We mustn't let him know we're coming until it's too late. If he prepares those wildfire caches, and we lose the element of surprise, he might torch King's Landing at once." A hush weighed on them. Lyanna felt Jon squirm again, his fussiness a small but insistent reminder that life did not pause for war. She carefully set aside her half-eaten stew and rose, motioning that she needed to step away. Ned and Rhaegar both nodded. Ned returned his attention to the flames, while Rhaegar watched her go, concern flickering in his gaze. She found her way through the ring of campfires until she reached a quieter spot beneath a tall oak. There, she rocked Jon in her arms, humming a low lullaby to settle him. The night air was cool on her cheeks. Crickets chirped in the tall grass, and in the distance, an owl hooted once. She let herself sink into the lullaby's soft melody, half remembered from days at Winterfell. Footsteps approached slowly. Ned. He paused a few paces away. "Lyanna," he said quietly, as though not to disturb Jon. "Are you all right?" She gave a shaky smile, turning to let the moonlight fall across the baby's sleeping face. "All right as can be, given we may be on the cusp of more bloodshed." She soothed Jon's hair. "He's restless tonight." Ned nodded, arms folded, his gaze flicking toward the gloom beyond the campsite. "I don't blame him. Everyone feels it. Even a child." She studied her brother's silhouette, remembering the day he first picked her up after she stumbled in the courtyard at Winterfell, how he brushed the snow from her cloak, cheeks flushed with worry. He had always been gentle, overshadowed by Brandon's swagger, but no less brave for it. Now that quiet bravery was all that held their family together. She drew a breath, deciding there was no reason to hold back what weighed on her. "Thank you, Ned, for coming with us, for not letting Robert's anger decide my fate. I know this is not easy for you." He kept his gaze on the distant dark. "I still can't say I accept all that's happened. Brandon and Father, there's a part of me that wants retribution. But I look at Jon, at you, and realize that vengeance won't undo the pain. If I can keep you both safe, that must be enough." Her eyes stung with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry you lost them, and that our house was torn apart because of my choices." He turned back toward her, face half illuminated by moonlight, brown hair stirring in the breeze. "You didn't swing the sword or light the pyre. Aerys did that. Robert tries to blame all Targaryens for what's happened, but I've come to see that's not fair. Rhaegar is not his father, and Jon is innocent in all this. Let's just hope we can end this madness before more innocents pay the price." She pressed her cheek against Jon's soft head and nodded. For a moment, the old closeness with Ned felt within reach, the easy companionship of siblings who shared secrets in the Winterfell Godswood. But war was a wedge that had split them. Perhaps, she thought, if they survived what lay ahead, they might find a way to mend that breach. They returned to the main campfire, where Rhaegar was conferring with Sir Oswell Went. The Kingsguard knight's solemn face was made starker by the shifting glow of embers. He gave Lyanna a polite incline of his head as she settled beside Rhaegar. Jon, lulled by the walk, had drifted into a half-sleep, tiny hand curled around a fold in Lyanna's cloak. She listened quietly to the discussion, gleaning details about how they would approach the city, where they might find a gate less guarded, how quickly they might reach the Red Keep. She sensed that the men were wary, prepared to face violence at every turn. Sir Oswell had fought beside Rhaegar at the Trident, and though that battle had favored Robert, the bond between the knight and prince remained unbroken. In his gauntleted hand, Sir Oswell held a charcoal-drawn map, lines indicating key points in the city's defenses. They talked of the Mud Gate, the King's Gate, the Dragon Gate. They weighed the merits of infiltrating at night versus entering at dawn. None of the options felt safe. Eventually, the hour grew late enough that the fires were banked and men took turns on watch. Lyanna found a makeshift tent of canvas near the edge of the trees, propped on poles where she could bed down with Jon in a straw-strewn corner. Rhaegar wanted to keep them close to the center, but she preferred some privacy, and he relented, promising extra guards nearby. She lay on a bedroll, Jon nestled in the crook of her arm, the faint lantern light revealing the pure curve of his cheek. She gently stroked his temple, listening to the shifting bodies of soldiers just outside, the low murmur of conversation that never fully died. The night was cold, and she drew her cloak tighter, wishing for the warmth of a true heart. She dreamed in fits. She saw visions of kings landing burning, pillars of green fire consuming the city's spires, ashes raining down. She saw Ned kneeling in the ruined Red Keep, sword in hand, a red stain on the stones. She saw Rhaegar screaming her name through walls of flame. She saw Robert's face twisted in triumph and hatred, his warhammer stained with the blood of the innocent. And all the while, she clutched Jon, trying to shield him from the inferno. She woke with her heart pounding, sweat clinging to her neck. Outside, dawn was breaking, the first rays of pale sunlight pushing through scudding clouds. Ned roused the camp early, urging them to eat quickly and saddle the horses. Rhaegar emerged from his own lean-to, looking as though he hadn't slept at all. Hair disheveled, mail shirt already donned. He came to Lyanna as she rocked Jon awake, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. She could taste the salt of his anxiety, or perhaps it was her own fear. They said little, for there was no need. The day had arrived when they would at last reach the city. By mid-morning, the company descended into lower terrain, the land flattening before them. Kingswood spread on their right, a dense canopy of oak, elm and pine that cast deep shadows on the road. To the left, open fields gave way patches of undergrowth. The men rode in columns, weapons kept loose in scabbards, scanning for any sign of ambush. A hush blanketed the air, broken only by hoofbeats and the occasional cough. Lyanna's nerves were strung tight as a harp's string, every jolt making her wonder if a messenger of Eris might appear. They encountered a ragged group of refugees trudging toward the countryside. At the sight of the Targaryen banners, a few cried out in alarm, though Ned quickly rode ahead, calling assurances that they meant no harm. Lyanna caught scraps of the peasants' murmured explanations, that the king had set heads on spikes along the city walls, that men with torches roamed at night, that stores of grain had been seized. Rumors and fear. One older woman clutched a bundle to her breast, claiming she'd seen green flames in the dungeons. That chilled Lyanna's blood. She glanced at Rhaegar, who wore a mask of composure, though a single muscle in his jaw twitched. They pressed on, leaving the refugees behind. By midday, the worn path rose to a vantage point, and there, at last, King's Landing appeared in the distance. Smoke hung over it like a dull haze, the outlines of its walls and towers blurred. The city sprawled along the black water, and from this distance, it looked more like a stained tapestry than the grand capital Lyanna recalled from the stories. Even so, it was daunting in size. The Red Keep perched on the tallest hill, the sun glinting off its battlements. They pulled off the road, gathering beneath a cluster of trees. Men dismounted to stretch their stiff limbs. A hush came over them as they peered at the city. The faint smell of ash and waste carried on the breeze. Jon stirred against Lyanna's chest, whining softly at the tension that seemed to vibrate through everyone. Ned and Rhaegar stepped aside to confer, scanning the walls with grave eyes. Sir Oswald joined them, his face set like stone. Lyanna, standing a short distance away, could see their lips moving quickly, but not the exact words. She could guess, though, the best gate to approach, how to conceal their numbers, how to slip inside without alerting the Mad King. Rhaegar eventually returned, voice quiet. "We'll divide into smaller groups," he explained. "We can't march up with banners flying. The gold cloaks or my father's men would repel us immediately. We'll enter through two of the lesser-used gates, perhaps the King's Gate and the Dragon Gate at dusk. Our men will pose as travelers or merchants, a few at a time. We'll regroup inside the city walls." Lyanna's pulse quickened. And then what? We stroll up to the Red Keep and knock on the door? No. He gave a mirthless smile. Not quite. I have some friends in the city who might offer safe harbor. Enough for us to organize. We'll do everything quietly. By the time my father realizes we're there, it'll be too late for him to rally a proper defense. With luck, we can detain him before he gives the order to light the wildfire. Ned approached, glancing from Lyanna to Rhaegar. Your father is paranoid. He may have men posted everywhere. And if the wildfire is set in caches beneath the streets, he might give the signal at any sign of trouble. Datman how? Rhaegar nodded grimly. That's why speed is essential. I have some knowledge of the Red Keep's secret passages. Maester Aemon shared old maps with me once, and I've walked them myself. A small force might slip in without alerting the entire guard. His gaze flicked to Jon. But you and Jon must stay hidden, Lyanna, until the palace is secure. She shifted on her feet, resisting the urge to protest. She knew the logic. She was no soldier. She had a newborn who needed her protection, and if events went poorly, they might need to flee. Still, it stung to imagine Rhaegar plunging into danger without her. I understand, she said, softly stroking Jon's back. Where will we hide? Ned answered. We've decided on an old stable near Flea Bottom, close to a certain inn that still harbors Targaryen sympathies. If Rhaegar is successful, we'll bring you to the Red Keep. If not... Oh. He let that trailing sentence speak for itself. Her heart hammered at the unspoken threat. Imagining the city in flames, Robert's men or King Aerys's pyromancers hunting them like rats. She swallowed. Then we hope it doesn't come to that. They wasted little time. Rhaegar split their company into smaller groups, each to skirt the city from different sides and filter in as inconspicuously as possible. Some of the northern men expressed reluctance to disguise themselves as commoners, but Ned's stern orders quelled objections. Lyanna, carrying Jon, would ride in a covered wagon with 2 trusted guards. She would pose as a young mother fleeing the chaos in the countryside. Rhaegar and Ned would slip in separately with small squads, each equipped with minimal heraldry to avoid detection. That afternoon a drizzle began. As though the very sky wept for the city, the road turned muddy, slowing their pace. The wagon's rough boards rattled beneath Lyanna and the 2 men who accompanied her. Jon's cries rose in protest when the ride grew too jarring, and Lyanna did her best to shush him, pressing him to her shoulder, tears pricking her own eyes. She hated that he had to endure this bumpy ruse, but she clenched her jaw. There was no choice. As dusk approached, she could see King's Landing looming taller, the gates indistinct shapes through the misty rain. The wagon queue moved slowly among other refugees and carts, all seeking entry before dark. Street peddlers, beggars, and half-starved peasants jostled near the gates. Lyanna peeked from beneath the wagon's tattered canvas, straining to glimpse the guards at the gatehouse. Gold cloaks and battered cloaks stood watch, checking each traveler with bored or suspicious eyes. She felt her heart drumming a frantic beat. If they recognized her, if someone saw the Targaryen features in Jon's face, she forced a calm expression, letting the guard peer briefly at her and the babe. His gaze slid disinterestedly over her, though it lingered for half a second on the sling. Then he waved them on, eyes already searching the next wagon. Relief washed over her in a wave so strong, she almost sobbed. The wagon rumbled under the gate's arch, passing beneath portcullis spikes that dripped with rainwater. A moment later, they were inside the walls of King's Landing. City of 1,000 secrets and 1,000 perils. The cramped streets smelled of rot and damp straw. Tight clusters of buildings leaned precariously, their eaves dripping onto pedestrians. Evening shadows stretched around corners, lamp flames flickering behind greasy glass. Lyanna clutched Jon, her senses reeling at the press of dirty faces, the hiss of whispered transactions from shadowed alleys. She remembered visiting the city as a child for a tourney, dazzled by the wealth near the Red Keep. Now she saw the other side, squalor and fear, as though a disease gnawed at the city's heart. The wagon driver, one of the guards disguised as a simple cartman, wound them through the cramped lanes. Twice they had to detour around makeshift barricades, where local toughs demanded coin. The guard tossed them a few coppers, enough to ward off trouble, and they passed on. Lyanna peered at the fortress looming on a distant rise, lights flickering in windows. Somewhere in those halls, Aerys Targaryen might be stalking, half mad, ready to rain wildfire at the slightest provocation. Somewhere else, Rhaegar and Ned were making their stealthy approach, hoping to converge at the designated safe house. If any part of their plan failed, she dreaded to think what might happen next. After what felt like hours, the wagon clattered into Flea Bottom, a district of narrow twisting alleys reeking of tanneries and unwashed bodies. Wooden buildings leaned so close overhead that the sky was only a ribbon of smoky darkness. Children in rags darted from doorways to watch the wagon pass. A group of men slouched by a gutter, eyeing them suspiciously. The guard driver quietly assured Lyanna that the inn they sought was close. She waited in tense silence, every jostle making Jon whimper. Finally, the wagon halted beside a sagging stable with a crooked sign overhead. Through the rain-blurred gloom, Lyanna read the sign's half-arrest name, the Sworn Sword. The building's timbers looked ancient, as though a strong wind might bring the entire structure down. A hunched old stable hand shuffled out, frowning at the sight of strangers. The guard climbed down, muttered something under his breath, and the man's eyes widened. He nodded, waving them inside. It seemed Rhaegar had allies here after all. Lyanna emerged from under the canvas, carefully shielding Jon from the drizzle. She grimaced at the stench of manure and damp straw, but it was shelter, and for that she was grateful. The stable hand pointed to a corner stall with fresh hay where she could rest. The guard lancer who accompanied her apologized for the poor conditions, explaining quietly that Rhaegar had no time to arrange better lodgings. Lyanna assured him it was fine, grateful enough to be off the streets. She settled onto a bale of hay, pressing a blanket beneath her for cleanliness, and peeled back Jon's sling. His cheeks were flushed from the heat of her body and the closeness of the canvas. He kicked feebly, letting out a tiny wail. She hushed him, kissing his forehead, tears pricking her eyes again. His small distress tore at her. She had dreamed of raising him in a quiet place, maybe even showing him the snows of Winterfell one day. Now here they were, in a filthy stable in the capital's worst district, waiting for a coup to unfold. But she refused to let regret overwhelm her. All she could do was survive each moment. The stable hand returned, carrying a battered wooden bowl of lukewarm water and a cloth. He nodded politely, if a bit fearfully, and mumbled that the mistress of the inn would send some food if she could spare it. Lyanna thanked him, then used the damp cloth to wipe Jon's face, cooling his flush. The baby's cry subsided to soft whimpers, and he stared up at her with wide, confused eyes. He was too young to understand the tumult around him, but she prayed that, somehow, he sensed her love. Hours passed in tense waiting. Outside, the rain slackened, but the wind picked up, rattling the stable's doors. Street noises filtered in, a distant argument, laughter that sounded more like cackling, the occasional roar of a drunk. Lyanna fed Jon, then held him against her shoulder, humming the lullaby that had become her only lullaby these past months. The guard occasionally peered out through a gap in the doors, searching for sign of Rhaegar or Ned. Their absence weighed on Lyanna's mind like a stone. At last, near midnight, the stable door creaked open. Two cloaked figures slipped inside, heads low, boots squelching on wet straw. The guard tensed, hand on his sword hilt, but a quick word from one of the figures made him relax. They pulled back hoods, revealing Ned's weary face and Rhaegar's solemn gaze. Lyanna nearly cried out in relief, but swallowed the sound so as not to wake the baby. Instead, she rose carefully, crossing to them, heart pounding. Rhaegar's cloak was soaked, dripping at the hem. Ned's hair clung to his forehead. Their expressions were grave. Ned cast a glance around the stable, then murmured, "We've managed to sneak in part of our force. The rest is waiting in alleys around the Red Keep. Our informant says the king rarely leaves his private chambers. The pyromancers are all stationed near the dungeons and around the hidden caches in the city." Lyanna's stomach clenched. "So what now?" Rhaegar let out a slow breath. "We've arranged to move at dawn. My men will secure the lower gates of the Red Keep. Ned's men will blockade the main approach from inside the city so no reinforcements can rush in. We'll take a small group through a postern door, up a hidden stair. With any luck, we'll reach my father's chambers quickly. "No." Ned nodded. "The risk is if we're discovered too soon. The guards loyal to the king may fight to the death. And if the king suspects an uprising, he might order the wildfire lit at once." Lyanna's face felt chilled despite the stuffy stable air. "What can I do?" Rhaegar's eyes flicked to Jon, then back to her. "Stay here. Keep our son safe. If all goes well, we'll send for you before midday. If not," he caught himself, voice wavering, "if not, you must flee. Ned can arrange a route to get you out of the city. I pray it won't come to that." "Not in Torn." She nodded, feeling tears threaten to spill. She wished she could hold him, cling to him. But Jon was in her arms, and there was no true privacy in this drafty stable. The guard lancer hovered in the shadows, and Ned watched with guarded sympathy. So Lyanna merely whispered, "Be careful." Rhaegar's lips parted, as if to say more, but Ned cleared his throat. "We should return soon. Our men are gathering supplies. The plan is set." Rhaegar paused, gaze lingering on Lyanna's face. Then he inclined his head, pushing his damp hair back with one hand. "I'll come back for you," he promised, barely more than a whisper. She believed him. She had to. They left as quickly as they'd come, vanishing into the darkness, cloaks streaming behind them. The stable door swung shut, leaving Lyanna with her son and a handful of loyal guards. She pressed Jon close, burying her face against his soft hair. She imagined the Red Keep's twisting corridors, the secret tunnels that Rhaegar had once described, the weight of steel in Ned's hand. She whispered a shaky prayer, pleading that the dawn would bring salvation instead of fire. But the night was slow to yield its secrets. She dozed in snatches, the straw prickling through her cloak. Jon tucked close to her chest. The stable hand snored somewhere in the next stall. The guard perched near the door. Every time Lyanna closed her eyes, she saw flickers of green flame in her dreams, smelled the acrid stench of smoke. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a pallid light began to seep between the loose slats of the stable walls. Dawn had arrived, and with it, the moment of truth. From her vantage, Lyanna couldn't see the sunrise, only the vague brightening of the sky. The guard lancer strained to hear any commotion outside. But the city woke gradually. Voices drifted from the streets, the bark of a vendor hawking wares, the rattle of a cart. Her heart thumped painfully, 1,000 questions swirling. Was Rhaegar already in the castle? Had Ned managed to block the approach roads? Or were they even now locked in battle with loyalists, the plan unraveling? An hour passed. Jon fussed, hungry, and she fed him as best she could, mind frantic with worry. The guard paced the stable's threshold, occasionally lifting a cracked board to peer through a gap. The stable hand drifted in and out, muttering that the inn's mistress was too nervous to venture forth. No one had any news. Every minute stretched, thick with foreboding. Then, distant and faint, Lyanna heard the tolling of a bell. She froze, straining to identify its meaning. In King's Landing, bells rang for many reasons: announcements, alarms, victories, funerals. She couldn't be certain. A few heartbeats later, a second bell sounded from another direction, overlapping the first, echoing across the city's stone walls. The guard cursed under his breath, glancing at Lyanna. She rocked Jon, wishing she could cover his ears, as if the bells themselves carried ill fortune. The stable door banged open without warning, making Lyanna start. 2 men spilled inside, panting, their boots caked with mud and soot. One was a northern soldier, the other a Targaryen guard she recognized from the fortress in Dorne. Their eyes were wild, sweat beading on their brows. Lyanna leaped to her feet, tightening her grip on Jon Day. "What's happened?" she demanded, heart in her throat. The Targaryen guard spoke first, breath ragged. The gold cloaks turned. Some stayed loyal to the king, others joined the prince. Fighting broke out in the outer wards. "We managed to secure the main gates of the Red Keep, but the king is barricaded inside the royal apartments. The bells are a signal. Hell's declared all traitors must be seized or the city burns." Lyanna's blood went cold. Rhaegar and Ned, where are they? "No, I know. They made it inside," the northern soldier said, chest heaving. They were heading for the throne room, hoping to intercept the king before he could reach the pyromancers. We got separated. Men are dying in the halls. We need to regroup, but we came to warn you. If the king lights the wildfire. She couldn't contain her gasp of horror. She glanced at Jon, tears brimming in her eyes. Is there a chance to stop him? Rhaegar? He must be close to. The guard's expression was bleak. He's trying, my lady, but the king had many loyalists hidden in the castle. Some of your father's old cronies from the days of the Defiance. They're fanatical. If the prince and Lord Stark fail to breach the royal apartments quickly. He trailed off, and Lyanna felt a tremor of decision pulse through her. She looked around the stable, the shadows on the walls, the panicked guard lancer by the door, and the wide-eyed stable hand cowering in the corner. It was madness, but every fiber of her being screamed that she should not remain here, waiting for news that might never come. Jon whimpered, as if echoing her turmoil. She steadied her voice. We can't just wait to be burned alive if the king sets the wildfire. We need to move, find safer ground, and if there's any way, I can help Rhaegar or Ned. I have to try. The Targaryen guard blinked in alarm. My lady, Prince Rhaegar gave strict orders for you to remain hidden. The city is a battlefield. She tightened her grip on Jon, feeling the quiver of her own limbs. So what do we do? Stay here like cattle and hope the fires don't reach us? If the king ignites the caches, Flea Bottom will be the first to burn. That's what I've heard. The poorest districts have no defenses. The northern soldier set his jaw. Lord Stark wouldn't want you marching into danger. But maybe we can flee now, slip out a postern gate. Better to be outside the walls than in them when the wildfire goes. Lyanna's breath hitched. She pictured the walls, the teeming streets, the possibility of being caught by the king's men or Robert's men, or any random band of cutthroats. Then she pictured Rhaegar fighting alone, Ned at his side, risking their lives to prevent this very catastrophe. Every moment that passed seemed to choke her with indecision. She glanced down at Jon. His dark lashes fluttered, oblivious to the terror swirling around him. At last, she spoke, voice trembling. If you truly think it's safer outside the city, then we'll try for the gates. But we must be swift, and if we see any sign that Rhaegar and Ned have succeeded, or that the city is secured, we must find them. The guard lancer from the fortress nodded, though with visible reluctance. The Targaryen guard and the northern soldier both agreed. The stable hand, terrified, asked to stay behind, but Lyanna insisted he come with them, fearful he'd be killed if found aiding traitors. The old man eventually relented, trembling. They hurried to gather what few supplies they had. Lyanna tucked Jon against her with a cloth binding and pulled a hooded cloak around them both. Her heart thundered as she stepped back out into the city. The drizzle turned to a clammy mist. Flea Bottom was chaos. People ran in every direction, shouting about traitors in the castle, about fire beneath the streets, about a brewing confrontation at the gates. The bells rang on, ominous and out of sync, creating a jarring din. Lyanna kept her head down, letting the guards lead her through the winding alleys. When they encountered a knot of armed brutes demanding coin, the men brandished swords. A tense standoff ensued until one recognized the Targaryen colors beneath the guard's cloak and spat, "Kill the dragons!" But a slash of steel from the northern soldier sent them scattering. Lyanna's pulse pounded, Jon stirring fretfully. They pressed on, encountering small pockets of violence. A pair of gold cloaks wrestling in the mud, cursing each other's loyalties. A screaming woman cradling a bleeding child. Lyanna felt horror claw at her, but she had no power to help them all. A cry of "Wildfire, wildfire!" echoed from another street, sending people fleeing in panic. Her heart seized, but the god lancer hissed that it might just be rumor. Still, the tension soared. Eventually they reached a crossroad leading toward the king's gate. The smell of smoke drifted, though no flames were visible. A crowd of frantic townsfolk banged on the barricaded gate, demanding to be let out. Gold cloaks patrolled the gatehouse overhead, threatening to shoot anyone who tried to climb the walls. Lyanna's guards guided her into a side alley, trying to find a quieter route, but found it blocked by rubble from a collapsed building. Trapped, they retreated, stepping over broken barrels and scattered refuse. The city felt like a snare tightening around them. Lyanna clutched Jon, his tiny face pressed to her neck. She could feel his hot breath against her skin, hear the rapid flutter of his heartbeat. She had never felt so powerless. From somewhere in the direction of the Red Keep came a faint roar of conflict, clashing steel, shouts that might have been war cries. The bells still rang, fueling hysteria. A sudden shriek erupted nearby, and Lyanna saw, to her horror, a swirl of emerald smoke wafting at the far end of the alley. A small jar of wildfire must have been ignited or thrown. The thick green vapors hissed, flames spitting along the cobblestones. People scattered, screaming. One woman fell, her skirts catching green sparks that leaped impossibly high. The guard lancer grabbed Lyanna's arm, yanking her back before she got a clearer view of the horrors. Her mind reeled. If the king unleashes more, the entire city will burn. They retreated to an adjoining lane, hearts pounding. But that was when 3 men in battered armor barreled into view, blocking the path. They wore the Targaryen sigil, yet their eyes were wild, as though fear or madness drove them. One brandished a spear, the other's swords. The lead soldier's voice cracked as he pointed the spear. "Who goes there? Stand aside or forfeit your lives." "Neverest one." The Targaryen guard with Lyanna raised his hands, shouting that they were on Prince Rhaegar's errand. But the men hesitated. Their expressions twisted between shock and suspicion. The spear wielder barked, "Don't lie." The king said traitors are everywhere. His voice quivered in desperation. The northern soldier tried to calm them, but the tension was too high. The city's chaos making reason impossible. The men lunged. The Targaryen guard shouted for Lyanna to run. She pressed herself against the wall, shielding Jon's body with her cloak. The stable hand cowered beside her. Steel flashed. The lane filled with the clang of metal, harsh grunts, the scrape of boots on wet cobblestones. One of the loyalists fell, blood slicking the stones. The spear wielder managed a thrust at the Targaryen guard's side. A cry rang out, echoing in the narrow space. Lyanna gasped, seeing red blossoming on the guard's tunic. The northern soldier roared, slashing at the attacker, who dropped with a final gurgle. A heartbeat later, it was over. 2 men lay dead. The third staggered away, mortally wounded, leaving a smeared trail before collapsing. The Targaryen guard who traveled with Lyanna clutched his side, breathing in ragged gasps, eyes wide with pain. Blood seeped through his fingers. "Forgive me," he rasped, dropping to one knee. The guard lancer knelt to support him, pressing a hand to the wound. Lyanna's stomach twisted at the sight, but she forced herself to approach, mindful of Jon. Man's face was ashen, his gaze flickering. "I can't go on," he choked out. "Stay with us," Lyanna begged, tears threatening. "We'll find help." But he simply closed his eyes, the life draining from him too quickly. Her guard lancer shook his head grimly, removing his hand from the wound. The soldier was gone. Lyanna bit her lip to stifle a cry. There was no time to grieve a man she scarcely knew, who had fought to protect her, and Jon. She pressed a trembling kiss to Jon's brow, as if to reassure herself he was alive, that her child had not been harmed by the swirl of violence. The guard lancer and the northern soldier exchanged a grim nod, then turned to Lyanna. "We have to keep moving," one said. She nodded, swallowing her grief. They slipped past the dead men, stepping through the alley's gloom. Every step hammered home the reality that King's Landing was a storm of conflict, with no corner safe. At each intersection they heard distant shouts or smelled smoke. Shadows flitted across the walls. Once, they ducked into a crumbling doorway to avoid a group of gold cloaks running past, yelling about cornering traitors. Finally, they reached a quieter street that angled north, away from the blazing pockets of Flea Bottom. The stench of smoke lessened, and the bells sounded a bit fainter. But even this relative calm brought only a brief respite. The guard lancer muttered that the king's gate was surely sealed by now. If the city was in full panic, no one would be allowed out. Lyanna knew they could only circle and search for another exit, or find refuge until Rhaegar and Ned succeeded. If they succeeded. Rounding a corner, they nearly collided with a young boy perched on a barrel. He jumped down, eyes bright with alarm at the sight of armed strangers. He was scrawny, no older than 10, with grubby cheeks and a tangle of hair. "You can't go that way," he blurted, pointing at the street ahead. "They're killin' folks near the sept." The northern soldier frowned. "Who is?" "Men in fancy armor," the boy said breathlessly. "They say they're the king's men, looking for traitors. I saw him drag a baker out and run him through." He glanced at Lyanna's cloak, at the shape of Jon's small head. "You got a babe there? You'll want to hide." Lyanna's heart lurched. She touched the boy's shoulder, voice trembling. "Where can we go?" The urchin chewed his lip, glancing about. "I know a place. It's an alley that leads to some old storehouses. Not many folks know it. Maybe you can wait there until the streets are clear." "Damn." She glanced at her guards, uncertain. The boy's face was earnest, but it could be a trap. Then again, the city was full of unknown threats. This child's warning might be her best chance. The northern soldier sighed. "We have little choice. Show us." The boy nodded, waving them to follow. They wound through a series of cramped passages littered with garbage, the smell of a rancid fish strong enough to make Lyanna gag. Jon stirred, letting out a cranky wail at the city's unrelenting chaos. Lyanna hushed him, her voice trembling. The boy led them behind a collapsed stable, along a crooked fence, then into a narrow lane that ended at a squat, half-burned building. The ground floor was boarded shut, but the boy pried a loose plank and gestured for them to crawl inside. The northern soldier ducked in first, sword ready. Finding no immediate danger, he signaled Lyanna and the guard lancer to follow. The boy slipped in last, reattaching the plank from within. The smell of old ash and mold clung to the darkness. Dust motes floated in pale beams of light from cracks in the boarded windows. Broken crates and sacks of rotted grain littered the floor. It was no palace, but it was at least an enclosed space away from prying eyes. The boy perched on a crate, hugging his knees. "My sister used to hide here when the bailiffs came around. You can wait until it's safe. Maybe by nightfall, them fancy knights will be done killin'." His tone held a child's stoic acceptance of brutality. Lyanna lowered herself against a wall, rocking Jon. The guard lancer turned to the boy. "What's your name?" He scratched his head. "Tom." Lyanna whispered her thanks, though she couldn't keep the tremble from her voice. "Tom, I'm grateful, but I need to find someone. My brother and my lord, they're in the Red Keep. If they succeed, maybe the city will be saved." Tom shrugged. "Dunno. I just know if them bells don't stop soon, it means bad things. You can hear 'em all over. Means the king's angry." Lyanna closed her eyes, pressing Jon's head to her collarbone. The bells tolled on, overshadowing the constant murmur of conflict outside. She felt trapped in a dreadful limbo, torn between the hope that Rhaegar and Ned would end the madness and the fear that at any moment, the city might erupt in green fire. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and hot, as Jon's fussing eased into a whimpering rest. She half sang the lullaby under her breath, clinging to each note like a lifeline. Hours bled away in that stifling gloom, the tension in the group mounting with each clang of the bells. Occasionally, they heard distant screams, or the distinct crackle of flames. None dared venture out. The guard lancer peered through a gap in the boards, reporting any sign of soldiers passing nearby. Twice, they heard hurried footsteps, but no one attempted to enter the building. Tom dozed, arms wrapped around himself, while the northern soldier paced, anxious. Lyanna's thoughts whirled with images of the Red Keep's halls running with blood, Rhaegar cornered by his father's men, Ned lying wounded on the throne room steps. She tried to banish the visions, but her mind refused to obey. At last, the bells fell quiet. The sudden silence was more startling than any roar. Tom jerked awake, eyes wide. The guard lancer moved to the boarded window. "They've stopped," he said. Lyanna swallowed, heart racing. She had no idea what that might mean, victory or utter defeat. She forced herself to stand, ignoring the ache in her limbs. Jon squirmed, as though sensing the moment's gravity. The northern soldier spoke in a hushed tone. "We should go check, see what's become of the city." The guard lancer nodded, but his gaze slipped to Lyanna. She squared her shoulders, hugging Jon. "I'm coming with you. I can't stand hiding any longer." Tom shifted on the crate. "I'll show you a back way." "But if the soldiers see you..." Lyanna felt the old panic gnaw at her. But she stepped toward the makeshift door. "I'd rather risk it than not know what's happened to my family." The guard lancer and northern soldier pried the plank loose, letting in a shaft of overcast daylight. The air smelled of char and rain-soaked debris. Clutching Jon beneath her cloak, Lyanna followed them out, Tom trailing behind. They crept through the deserted alley, every sense on alert. The city had taken on an eerie stillness, with only scattered figures moving in the distance. Smoke drifted overhead, and a faint breeze stirred the debris in the street. They made their way toward a broader avenue that offered a hazy view of the Red Keep's outline on the hill. The bells no longer rang, and no new alarms sounded. Lyanna's palms were sweaty against Jon's swaddling as she peered toward the fortress. Without warning, a pair of gold cloaks came round the corner, stepping right into their path. Lyanna stiffened, but the men bore no weapons in hand, though swords dangled at their hips. They wore expressions of grim exhaustion, as though emerging from a nightmare. One guard spotted them and let out a bark. The guard lancer tensed, stepping protectively in front of Lyanna. But the gold cloak called out, "Easy, it's over. The king is dead. Lay down your steel if you mean no harm." Lyanna's breath caught. "The king is dead." She blinked, hardly daring to believe. The guard lancer and the northern soldier exchanged a shocked look. Tom edged closer, eyes alight with curiosity. Lyanna felt her throat constrict. If Aerys was dead, then had Rhaegar succeeded? Or had Robert done it? She found her voice, trembling. "What of Prince Rhaegar? Lord Stark?" "Nin?" The gold cloaks glanced at each other, then back to her. "Prince Rhaegar has taken the throne. Lord Stark stands with him. We've been ordered to restore calm. The city's safe from wildfire, they say. The pyromancers are in chains." Lyanna let out a sob of relief, her hand flying to her mouth. She felt her knees nearly buckle. Jon stirred, letting out a startled cry, and she pressed him closer, tears flooding her eyes. The guard lancer looked as if he could scarcely believe it. "The city is secure." The other gold cloak nodded. "Much of the garrison is in chaos, but the Mad King is done. Some loyalists still fight, but word's spreading fast that Rhaegar is king now. We're to keep the peace." He paused, studying Lyanna's face, the baby in her arms. Something in her expression must have struck him. "If you're searching for the new king, he's in the Red Keep, with Lord Stark, dealing with the aftermath." Lyanna exhaled shakily, tears streaming. Ned was alive. Rhaegar was alive. The city still stood. She had to see them, to confirm this with her own eyes. She turned to the guard lancer, voice quivering with hope. "We go to the Red Keep." He nodded, though he still looked wary. The gold cloaks stepped aside, letting them pass with a curt wave. Tom lingered, uncertain, until Lyanna turned to him. "You've helped us so much. Will you come with me? I'll see you rewarded." Tom swallowed. I don't know. This is all too big for the likes of me." She saw the fear in his eyes. "Then stay safe," she whispered, pressing a small coin into his hand. "Use it if you need help." The boy nodded, then darted away into the confusion, as children sometimes do, lost in the swirl of a changing city. Lyanna watched him vanish, hoping he'd survive in this new order. The guard lancer and northern soldier escorted her up the winding roads that led to the Red Keep. Along the way, they saw scattered signs of battle. Bodies in Targaryen armor or the motley uniforms of the city watch. Some had fallen near doorways, others in the middle of the street. A small crowd huddled outside the main gate of the Red Keep, apparently trying to gain entry. Gold cloaks stood guard, and behind them, men in the armor of Ned's northern retinue were visible. Lyanna's heart lifted at the sight of the direwolf sigil. She moved forward, hood drawn, tears still shimmering on her cheeks. One of Ned's men recognized her with a start, hurrying forward to bow. "My lady." Lord Stark told us to be on the lookout for you. Praise the gods you're safe." He shouted for the gates to open, waving her through. The crowd parted, murmuring at the sight of a cloaked woman clutching an infant, surrounded by armed guards. Lyanna focused only on the fortress courtyard now visible, ignoring the curious stares. They passed through the heavy gates into the Red Keep's outer ward. The place was strewn with debris in the aftermath of frantic battle. Splintered pikes, broken shields, and fresh bloodstains. A hush had settled, as though the entire stronghold still reeled from the turmoil. Guards in mismatched uniforms, some wearing Targaryen insignia, others wearing northern colors, stood watch over captive pyromancers who knelt with bound wrists. Lyanna averted her eyes from the kneeling men's frantic, wide stares. A tall figure strode across the courtyard, and Lyanna's heart soared when she recognized Ned's hair and carriage. He called out her name, quickening his pace. She hurried forward, tears blurring her vision. Ned reached her, voice thick. "Gods be good, Lyanna. I was so afraid you'd been caught in the chaos." She clung to him awkwardly, mindful of Jon, letting out a choked sob. "I tried to leave the city. Everything was madness. We hid." Her words tumbled in half-formed sentences. He pulled her against him, arms gentle but firm. He drew back enough to look at Jon, relief and wonder crossing his features. "He's well. You're both well." His gaze roamed her face, then scanned the courtyard. "We only just secured the Red Keep an hour ago." Rhaegar confronted his father in the throne room. It was... He swallowed. It was ugly, but the king is dead. And the wildfire was never lit. Some caches were ignited in small pockets, but the majority remain untouched. She struggled to speak. "Rhaegar, where is he?" Ned took her arm, guiding her across the courtyard. Soldiers and officials parted before them. "He's in the throne room dealing with the aftermath, seeing to wounded. Some lords have already bent the knee. Others are in shock." Manor. They stepped through the grand doors of the Red Keep, into an echoing hall that smelled of incense and fresh blood. Tapestries lay torn on the floor, stained with footprints. Columns soared overhead. Rows of battered guards stood at attention. Lyanna's breath caught at the sight of fallen bodies near the dais, loyalists who'd made a final stand from the look of it. At the far end, the Iron Throne loomed, its twisted metal shimmering in the guttering torchlight. Rhaegar stood just before it, not seated yet, his silver hair streaked with grime and sweat. He looked exhausted, but alive. Kingsguards surrounded him, and a cluster of lords knelt nearby, murmuring prayers or pledging loyalty. Lyanna's heart pounded so fiercely, she could hardly breathe. He turned as Ned approached, and his eyes fell upon Lyanna. Relief and heartbreak mingled in his expression. She closed the distance, ignoring the stares of the lords and knights around them. Rhaegar reached for her, gathering her in a trembling embrace. She could smell blood on his armor, the tang of steel. She pressed her forehead against his chest, tears soaking into the scorched leather near his collar. Jon whimpered, sensing the tension. Rhaegar gently stroked the baby's head, then cupped Lyanna's cheek, forcing her gaze upward. His face was smudged with soot, and a shallow cut marred his temple. "You're safe," he whispered. "Thank the gods. I was terrified when word came that Fleabottom was aflame." Lyanna could barely speak past the tightness in her chest. "We hid, then tried for the gates. But everything..." Her tears blurred her words, and he hushed her softly, letting her cry against him for a moment in the hush of the throne room. All around them, men watched in a stunned sort of reverence. The newly crowned king, embracing the Stark woman who carried his heir. Ned hovered protectively, arms folded, as though daring any to interrupt. Jon let out a small cry, and Rhaegar finally drew back, eyes locked on the child's face. "It's over," Rhaegar said, voice raw. "My father is gone, and the city is saved." Lyanna managed a shaky nod. What happens now?" He glanced at the Iron Throne's jagged outline. "Now I must secure the realm. The rebels must be convinced to stand down. Robert..." He stopped, inhaling. "Robert will demand answers. Perhaps he'll never forgive me. But we have a chance to end the war without more bloodshed." I won't let the realm be torn apart again." Lyanna tightened her hold on Jon. "We named him publicly. He's your son, the new prince. Let the realm see that a Targaryen can unite with the Starks. Maybe that will quell some of Robert's fury." Rhaegar turned, casting a solemn glance at the gathered lords, many of whom had begun to rise from their kneeling. Silence fell thick and heavy. At last he spoke, voice echoing in the vaulted space. "You all see Lady Lyanna Stark, my consort, mother of my child. May it be known that her family's honor is intact, that she is no hostage, but stands freely by my side. Let any who would call her or the boy treasonous speak now." No one spoke. Some lowered their gazes, others looked between one another, uncertain. A faint shuffle rippled through the ranks as men stepped back, letting the king's words ring in the hush. Lyanna's cheeks burned at the scrutiny, but she held her chin high, letting them see the truth in her eyes. Ned lingered behind, quietly resolute. Rhaegar continued. "The war's not finished, but the threat of wildfire has ended. As your king, I vow to bring peace to the realm, and I will not allow the innocent to suffer further." His voice faltered slightly, betraying the weight of the battle just fought. He steadied himself. "Those who would stand with me, do so now. Those who will not, lay down your arms and depart in peace. This is a time for healing, not vengeance." The mainstran. A murmur spread. Some of the lords knelt again, murmuring oaths to King Rhaegar. Others hesitated but did not protest. Lyanna felt Ned at her side, the faint brush of his hand on her shoulder. He spoke softly in her ear. "I will do what I can to make the North accept him. It won't be simple, but it's the best path forward." She cast him a grateful look. Then she turned to Rhaegar, who stood, shoulders squared, as if preparing for a lifetime of burdens. Gently, she offered Jon to him. The baby squirmed, letting out a tiny squeak as his father cradled him before the Iron Throne. It was a sight she would never forget. The last Targaryen king holding a newborn of dragon and wolf blood, the realm's battered lords standing witness. A single tear slipped down Rhaegar's cheek, leaving a clean track in the soot. He bowed his head over his son, pressing a kiss to Jon's brow. "It is done," he said softly, voice only for her. "We have a chance to shape a new world for him. No more secrets, no more lies." She closed her eyes, letting relief and sorrow mingle in her chest. She remembered the haunted nights waiting in Dorne, the fear of Robert's hammer, the knowledge of her father's death, the moment she named Jon so the world would know him. All of it had led them here, to a throne room littered with the echoes of battle, to a tenuous peace that might crumble if they failed to guide it. But for the moment, she let herself lean against Rhaegar's arm, feeling the warmth of Jon's small body between them. Ned hovered close, a silent sentinel, and she reached out to take his hand, thankful that he was alive, that he had tried to save her even when all seemed lost. In that breath of respite, she offered a prayer to the old gods and the new Etowah. She prayed for the realm, for Robert, for the ghosts of those lost. She prayed that Jon Targaryen, born of ice and fire, would know a world free from the carnage that had nearly consumed them. And though she did not know what challenges lay ahead, she took strength in the sight of her son pressed against Rhaegar's chest, the swirl of their entwined destinies forming a fragile but unbreakable bond. Somewhere outside, the city still smoked, and the echoes of war lingered. But here, in the echoing hall, with the Iron Throne towering behind them, Lyanna felt the first breath of hope for a new beginning. She let the tears spill freely, pressing her forehead against Jon's velvety hair. Rhaegar's heartbeat a steady drum at her side, and Ned's loyal presence just behind. They had reached this moment through sorrow and love, betrayal and sacrifice, and the realm would be shaped by it for years to come. Lyanna raised her head, meeting Rhaegar's gaze. He offered a faint, weary smile, as if to say they had endured. The lords watched with uncertain eyes, and the hush was absolute. In that hush, Lyanna Stark of Winterfell, and mother of a Targaryen prince, slowly inhaled, letting the weight of this fragile victory settle. For however long it lasted, they had found a measure of peace, and she clung to it with all her battered heart.